Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 16th, 2024 meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee. I think we're going to get started. Shh. Quiet in the audience. Thank you. I believe we have a quorum. Do we need to do a roll call, though?
Councilmember Burns. Councilmember Harakaris.
Here.
Councilmember Reed. Committee Member Rodriguez.
Here.
Committee Member Zolomi. Here. Committee Member Berlin. Here. Committee Member Thurston.
Here.
And Chair Ravel.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a quorum. So we will plunge into our pretty extensively challenging discussion this evening. So first we're going to have public comment, and I'm going to start with the people who have signed up here. So first is Tina Payton, and then we'll have Aaron Bornstein. And I'm giving everybody 2 minutes.
Good evening. Stop reinventing the wheel. You are nitpicking on the housing providers. You do not need to talk about just cause, no new ordinances. We have an ordinance in place that works just fine. And here you are pretending like you care about affordable housing. What about the people on Wesley? You need to clean up your own backyard before you start trying to nitpick on people that are trying to provide housing. We don't need a new shelter. Connections already runs a shelter 1.5 blocks away from where you're trying to propose on Church and Oak. People need to be placed in housing. Take a look at Chicago. You want to emulate dirty diapers, rats, roaches, measles. Is that what you want for Evanston? I have units available, and as Joanne Zolomi said at the last meeting, I had units available. Steering is illegal. You want to talk about landlords steering? The city of Evanston is steering. You need to clean up your backyard first. These ordinances, and you said you were doing a special meeting, get rid of it. Get rid of it. You're talking out both sides of your neck while you're trying to tell us what to do, and you're doing it to the people on Wesley, and I see the people on Avador. Clean it up first.
Thank you. So Aaron Bornstein, and then it's going to be Kathy Jefferson.
Good evening. I'm Aaron Bornstein, a housing provider here in Evanston. It's good to see everybody again. It's been a bit since I've been here. Briefly on Just Cause, all the reasons I previously stood at this podium and explained, all the practical flaws are still the same as they were. Just Cause rewards the tenants who break the rules, who make noise disturbances, who party, who smoke in the non-smoking building, and then it forces out the tenants who obey the rules, and otherwise they have to live with it. The housing provider loses control of their buildings. We can't provide the quality housing we want to, and it causes disinvestment in the city of Evanston. The new factor we have to consider now is the Evanston city attorneys have done their analysis of Just Cause. They found a number of legal flaws with it, not the least of which, is it violates the Illinois Rent Control Preemption Act. So instead of moving forward with Just Cause, which is going to get a lawsuit, is going to lead to costs and litigation, I would urge you to take a different approach to the housing situation. You should work with the real estate community so we can build more housing, we can grow our way out of the affordability crisis. The tried and true ways to encourage investment in a city are, and I'll be brief here, you can do upzoning so you have more density. You allow alternate dwelling units like garden units, coach houses. You decrease permitting time, decrease permitting costs, or ultimately you can provide property tax credits for those who invest in the city. This way you add jobs and you build your community up and you have more housing, and then housing becomes less expensive. You do have to give up on Just Cause to encourage that type of behavior. quickly. The other issues, right of first refusal. This was always a very soft idea. Your benefits you provide is to a very small number of people and at the cost of delaying every multi-unit sale in the city by, I think it was up to 5 months was what the ordinance says. I hope that one also dies today. And then finally, and the 13 points that you're talking about moving forward, the one that I would flag for you is the timing issue, where the landlord must give 90 days to non-renewal, but a tenant only has to give 30 days. That hasn't been thought through. You can't have one party in the housing equation having 90 days because there's no supply. The supply will only be available in 30 days. That needs more work. It has to be, it should be segregated out. You should talk it through. It doesn't work the way it's drawn up, and I would encourage you to slow down on that one at least. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Kathy Jefferson?
Good evening, council members. My name is William Carter. I'm one of the tenants of the Wesley Apartments. I'll make this as brief as possible. September 6, 2022, Evanston Housing Coalition dissolved the coalition. We have a statement on February 13th that we need to vacate. That is over a year after the dissolving of the coalition. The Uniform Relocation Assistance Act states that before we are forced out of our homes, new homes are supposed to be made available at the rates that we pay, at the size that we live in. If we live in a two-bedroom apartment, we are to be moved to a bedroom apartment at the rent that we were in. This was put together in 1990, I think. It was redone. All right. With this information, why did no one allocate funds to the Wesley building? During that time, there was also funds from ARP, and there was funds from reparation. None of those funds were directed toward the Wesley buildings, knowing that there was an issue with them. Even with this information, the city received a list of needs, not demands, not wants, needs that the tenants requested so that our move will give us some sense of balance and safety. This list was almost in its entirety denied. And we never were given a good reason why that list was almost in its entirety denied. We're asked to move from our homes, throw away half of our belongings with no safety net, and we're told, no, you have no safety net, you have no rights, we don't believe in your needs. This is unacceptable. It does not even come close to meeting the needs that we asked for. Additionally, we have never received any court documentation supporting the city's claim that the buildings are uninhabitable. The only danger, present and visible, are the damaged stairs and the landings which has been exasperated by the supports installed by the city. We, the tenants of Wesley, still have questions. According to Alderman Burns of the 5th Ward, we attended weekly meetings, discussions, the fate of the Wesley apartments without the tenants knowing or being present. Why was ARP and reparations not allocated to the elderly community of the 5th Ward, which is the 5th Ward of Bobby Burns? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is John Kozlowski. And then it'll be Kristen White.
Good evening, Chair Revelle, committee members. My name is John Kozlowski. I'm with the Chicagoland Apartment Association. We want to continue to urge you to reject any future amendment to the Evanston RLTO that would enact a just cause eviction policy. I understand that just cause is only a discussion item at this time. However, we remain opposed to this damaging policy. I understand that CAA, which is Chicagoland Apartment Association, represents owners and managers of nearly 280,000 residential rental apartments in over 1,900 apartment communities throughout the Chicagoland region, including over 2,500 units in the city of Evanston. Despite proponents' assertions that just cause eviction measures benefit residents, we believe and experience has demonstrated the opposite to be true. Just cause eviction restrictions hurt residents by limiting property owners' ability to respond to resident concerns and remove disruptive and threatening residents. Such policies harm rental communities and disincentivize investment in rental housing. This committee has already seen how devastating the lack of incentive and inability to invest in rental property can be for tenants. In addition to the significant legal issues raised by the legal department here, just cause policies destabilize apartment communities by preventing owner-operators from effectively managing their properties. For example, just cause essentially eliminates a property owner's right to serve a non-renewal notice on a resident at the end of a lease term, granting residents an indefinite lease. Meeting the legal standard required to prove a resident is disruptive requires detailed record keeping on the part of the owner and corroborating testimony of affected residents against neighbors. This can be difficult to obtain as residents may fear retaliation from the individuals in question. The unfortunate outcome is that good residents move out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Kristen White. And then Gail Schechter.
Good evening. My name is Kristen White, and I'm a resident of the 2nd Ward in Evanston. I work at YWCA Evanston North Shore, and I live in the 2nd Ward. I'm here to speak for myself, but I spoke previously on behalf of YWCA. We are a landlord in Evanston, and we fully 100% support all the recommendations in the ordinance, including the just cause. We often do cash for keys for tenants where we seek to non-renew for reasons that have been illuminated tonight. So we are already informally helping to pay to relocate people, and our own Vice President of Finance and Operations said, well, we're already doing it. So let's make sure it's on the books and it's fair and consistent, and it's a common practice for landlords to do that. So this is not something completely out of the blue and unusual. I urge, as a personal citizen, I urge this committee in the strongest possible way to not throw out just cause based on the memo you have received from the city. Open Communities has responded with some compelling arguments as to why this committee should send this question back to staff for further due diligence. I think the biggest legitimate concern is if this would cause a significant raise in rents. That is worth looking at before moving forward, and we don't need to rely on the speculation of one attorney. City staff can do research on similar municipalities across the country to see how just cause ordinances have affected rent when there is not rent control. So we don't need to guess, we don't need to speculate. There's actually data out there that should be presented to this committee for review before this policy is tossed out for that concern. As a renter in Evanston, I've been living here for 10 years and plan to be for another 15. This provision would have a direct impact on my housing security and is one of the most personally important issues that I've seen come before the city for consideration. I personally had a landlord end my lease under the pretext of him needing to sell the unit. I paid my rent on time, I had no complaints from neighbors, and almost no communication with this landlord. Instead of going month to month, I moved out as I needed stable and predictable housing for my child. This landlord ended up forging my signature on a document he used to retain my full security deposit. When I confronted him on this because I had kept the original documentation that did not include my signature, he panicked and gave me all my money back. This was a single unit landlord. It wasn't some big horrible hedge fund owner who was functioning under false pretext. He ended up renting the apartment after I left, so that wasn't accurate. And I still have no idea why he refused to renew my lease. I can't afford to buy in Evanston. I can barely afford to rent. Renters should not be punished by having higher levels of housing insecurity because they have no predictability over their ability to stay in Evanston. So please have courage. Don't discard this. Send it back for further review and discussion because there is a middle ground.
Thank you. Gail Schechter. And then Dan Schermerhorn.
Hi, my name is Gail Schechter. I'm a longtime housing advocate. And I'm also the executive director of Housing Opportunities and Maintenance for the Elderly or Home in the city of Chicago. And I'm speaking in support of the Wesley residents. And given that you're having this conversation here about just cause or in general about tenants' rights, I would urge the city to be really clear about whose side you're on, because what we're seeing is a lot of questions about why these residents are being told they have to move, but there's no sense of urgency about it. There's no data. There's no inspection report. We're finding out that, and I just found out this evening from a credible source, that there's a plan by the current owner to sell the properties to the family of Peter Isaac, who used to be on the Evanston Plan Commission. His father is Sargon Isaac, who is known, yes, as one of a notorious landlord. What is going on here? If I were in your shoes, I would be putting these buildings under receivership, having a judge appoint a receiver, and having repairs made. This is what's happens in other cities. I had gotten through home one of our contractors to do an estimate. We found that those porch staircases and platforms can be rehabbed for about $1.1 million. The buildings are not, imminently going to fall down. These can be repaired. It's a matter of getting some responsible management. So I can present this to you, but I would urge you to come be clear and support these residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Skirmerhorn? Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Dan Skirmerhorn. I'm with Skirmerhorn & Company and a member of the North Suburban Housing Providers. And my comments focus in on one of the, wow, that was quick. On one of the 13 items that I think are on the agenda for approval this evening. And that has to do with the renewal. It's in the section 5365, talking about renewal. This section talks about non-renewal, but also talks about renewal. And it talks about renewal where a housing provider must provide at least 90 days notice before the lease ends of the proposal to renew a lease. But then it goes on to say that no tenant shall be required to renew a lease more than 30 days prior to the termination date of the rental agreement. And I've had the opportunity to talk with Sarah Fox about it. I think I mentioned it the last time I was before you. This is creating what I think would be chaos in the rental market. You're not talking about a non-renewal situation. You're talking about a situation where a person has chosen not to stay on in their apartment, and now the apartment becomes available for rent. But now you've condensed the amount of time that it can be offered to the market to the last 30 days of the lease. It just seems to me like out of all the provisions that are in here, this one is pretty simple to fix. And it would benefit everybody involved to not have this become a quagmire with 30 days to go as far as getting things rented. So it would be my hope that that could be pulled out and reviewed. And I think a reasonable solution could be to offer the renewal 90 days, at least 90 days prior, give the tenant 30 days to make a decision. It still leaves you 60 days to then market the property if they decide not to renew. It doesn't seem controversial to me. It seems like a pretty simple thing to fix before you go ahead and pass these different provisions. There are other things that I think that the city attorney has pointed out or have some challenges to them that I think can be worked on as we move forward. But I would just like to see, some consideration given to that provision as you guys discuss these items tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A couple of names here that I truly cannot read. Whoops. Is there like Joseph, somebody? Something, first name starts with a J.
Which one is it? Yeah, Joker. Schumann or something? Yeah, it begins with an S. Last name begins with an S.
Initials JS. Aha.
Joan. I guess that's Joan. Now I see that.
Okay, there we
Joan,
go.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then, yeah.
Hi, I'm Joan Skirmerhorn from Skirmerhorn Company. And My brother spoke on the issue about the notice for renewal, so he stole some of my ideas. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about the one-time right to pay and stay for tenants with delinquent rents. And after a period of like 60 days, when a tenant is behind, and most landlords turn over to an attorney to try to start either collecting or evicting, it seems like if they have not had their, haven't found the opportunity or the way to pay for it, that doing a one-time pay to stay when you're down the road past 60 days, yeah, maybe they can come up with the funds, but will they be able to sustain that? And what I think most landlords would just rather do would say, okay, we'll take possession, you know, not have to go through all the legal ramifications for the tenant or the landlord if they can come to an agreement about that. But if you pay and stay and then it happens again, do they get another chance and then again?
It's a one-time.
Okay, all right. So I just, if they can take care of it in one time, I'm great, but I don't want to have this false idea that it could go ongoing. All right, thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Okay, you want to try your guess at this one, Joanne?
Okay. Oh, well, that one, yeah.
Oh, okay, he, never mind, here we go, okay.
Hi. Bill Skirmahorn. I just want to make a comment on, we're all up here talking about being fair and equitable, and you talk about the late fees, and the city of Evanston charges late fees. Let's be consistent. If you guys are going to put this on the public, if they're late with their water bill, not only that, they can get their water shut off, and you say the landlord can't charge a reasonable fee, I don't even think it's lawful. I think you guys, fair is fair. It's real simple. So there's a lot of things in this, but that one to me is just simple. You got to be fair, and they got to have a reason to pay on time, or what's the incentive to pay on time? Just like a water bill, just like your tax bill. Look at everyone's paid their taxes. What happens if you're late? The IRS doesn't like it, and you get fined. Okay? So we're not trying to do anything that's not reasonable. So it's got to be fair. It's got to be consistent. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia Cohen? And then it'll be Bev Paul.
Hi, I'm Sonia Cohen. My husband and I own and live in a small rental building. Tonight's agenda states that Evanston's new housing policies better align with Cook County's RLTO, with an exception. Cook County excludes owner-occupied buildings with 6 or fewer units, except for anti-lockout provisions. The Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University published a report on the 2023 state of rental housing in Chicago and found that small-scale landlords who own a large amount of the city's supply of unsubsidized affordable housing may raise rents as they struggle with cost of repairs and rising property taxes, something we can all identify with. Further, the supply of rentals in 2 to 4 unit buildings is dropping, threatening a key source of housing affordability. This research could easily apply to Evanston. We have a lot of small units, and there may be unintended consequences as small landlords may sell their buildings or stop renting if they fear a loss of flexibility in managing their home or an increased financial burden with the pay and stay, the displacement fund. Often, financial gain takes a backseat to having good tenants who are also our neighbors, and given the intimate spaces we share, sometimes our roommates, or so it seems. Rents may help with taxes and utilities, but not expensive needed infrastructure, such as a new roof, steam boiler, or tuck pointing. Please research and understand the important role of small units in providing affordable rent in Evanston. I ask you to consider excluding small owner-occupied buildings from the RLTO. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Bev Paul. Yes, thank you.
Good evening. On Sunday, we had a brunch at the Avador. It was bittersweet. We were celebrating our friend, a 60-year-old disabled woman who had found a place to live. After searching for months, she found a subsidized apartment that met the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was also a sad occasion. We were saying goodbye to our friend, who was forced to leave the Avador. Greystar Management wouldn't renew her lease, and she was not given a reason. Without just cause, they didn't have to. It's been said that what's going on at the Avador is a one-off. Not so. A resident of 1717 Evanston, another Greystar building, received a lease non-renewal. Management also refused to tell her why. She suspects it was because she commented on some maintenance issues in the building. Since abuse at the Avador has become public, management has stopped handing out bogus lease violation warnings. At a recent town hall with residents, representatives from building owner Trammell Crow and local and national Greystar Management, they said that they were here to support Avador staff who were being beaten up. Really? By a bunch of senior citizens? In January, Adult Protective Services started an investigation into elder abuse at the Avador. We'll see who's being abused when the APS reports are available to be made public. The U.S. Department of Justice is suing Greystar and its giant corporate cohort for nationwide price fixing. Their business model is silencing or non-lease renewal if tenants complain about reduced services, maintenance, and high rents. Their lobbyists kill attempts by municipalities to give tenants tools like just cause, our only way of fighting back. Landlords have all the tools they need in the leases they write. Don't believe their scare tactics. Support just cause now.
Thank you. Mark Carlin.
Thank you for your time and work on this commission. I live in the 9th Ward. I wanted to ask you to just remove your mind for a second from the legal thicket of just cause and look at our shared common values in Evanston, which is part of the reason I love the community. People in Evanston are very, very concerned and interest in promoting the health of their families, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, and their communities. I feel now that without a just cause ordinance, that faith in Evanston is being imperiled. We have a situation now where 43% of renters, 43% of Evanston residents are renters. The rentals are soaring, much so that even staff members of Evanston cannot afford to live in Evanston, let alone people who are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. I think that we have to be concerned about a vision for Evanston. We have this vision project going on, and we can only have a vision if we have a just cause ordinance. I don't think this is much of a restriction on landlords as they make it out to be. Landlords are making out very well in the current rental market in Evanston. And I think...
Point of order.
And I think that when a landlord owns a fixed asset that was bought at a certain price, the asset remains without any increase in terms of what the landlord has to put into it. And so I think that just cause is the time come, and we want a future vision of Evanston, of a flourishing, vibrant community that embraces diversity, equitable, and inclusion, then we need, at this time, very strongly, a just cause ordinance.
Thank you. Eric Passett?
Thank you. I'm Eric Passett. I'm the owner of North Shore Apartments and Condos, and I'm also a citizen of the 4th Ward. And I've said this about 1,000 times, I'm going to say it again, but everything that we're talking about tonight kind of defeats the purpose. So another building sold in Evanston, I'm sure Elizabeth might know which one, but it's another building that I represent, and to think that landlords don't promote affordable housing is crazy. So every time a building sells, the new landlord is forced to raise the rents astronomically because you bought it at a lot, higher rate than say somebody like us owned it at. So 26 more people are forced to leave because the rents are going to get raised. So all the stuff about just cause being, about affordable housing is the exact opposite. And all you're doing is you're forcing landlords like myself and other people to sell their buildings. The landlord I worked for that sold their building says, I'm sick and tired of dealing with these politics. So they sold their building. I know a couple other buildings like this have done exactly the same thing, and now the building's unaffordable. So all those people, we had 3 bedrooms that were $2,200. That's not astronomical. That's actually pretty affordable. So now you're going to take that $2,200 rental and make it $3,200 or $3,800. So how did we improve the system? We did the exact opposite. So now you're forcing more people who wanted to live in Evanston, who loved Evanston, that we made affordable for them, forced them out. Same thing with property tax, same thing with all your other stupid laws. So anyways, enough said.
Thank you. And how about Kurt Mittenbuehler? Sorry to mispronounce that.
I'm a small apartment building owner. I was early on in the home inspection business. I've been in literally 15,000 buildings in Chicago Metro, thousands and thousands of apartments. A couple people in this room are clients of mine. A couple people in this room are people that didn't like the reports that I delivered on their piece of crap buildings. I've got a really broad spectrum overview of housing that not a lot of people have. I actually am in alignment with the objectives for the people that want decent housing in Evanston. Excuse me. But just cause isn't how you get there. There isn't any good evidence anywhere to show that these kinds of ordinances improve housing, make things more equitable, and trying to decide these things on a few emotional stories from people in here isn't how to decide this stuff. I agree with the objectives, but just cause isn't how you get there. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the sign-up sheets, and we're going to move into the rest of our business. But first, Committee Member Hugo Rodriguez asked to make a little public comment.
Thank you, Chair Revelle. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hugo Rodriguez. I'm a resident of the 8th Ward. And I want to start by thanking the committee for the collective effort it has taken to get to this point with the Landlord-Tenant Ordinance. While the work is not yet done, I feel we are in a much better position, and I'm grateful for everyone's work. The intent of this committee is to build equitable housing, economic opportunity, and well-being for all. The strength of this committee is in its diversity of thought and experience. I am proud to be a member of this committee, and I take my duties very seriously, and it is my objective to bring professionalism and integrity into every discussion and decision. That is why I want to state for the record that I will not tolerate disrespect to myself or to any of my colleagues. I will not tolerate colleagues on this committee casting doubt on the integrity of my statements or impugning my right to ask questions of the city in relationship to decisions being made out about our housing stock, especially properties that house our most vulnerable citizens. It is not just my role as a committee member to ask clarifying questions, to demand accountability and require transparency from decision makers. It is the role of every citizen of the city of Evanston. I encourage everyone here or those listening virtually to stand up for our city by continuing to ask the necessary questions. Do not give in to the fear of being verbally attacked for doing so. I will not succumb to intimidation tactics, and I will continue to ask the necessary questions as we serve the city of Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a point of order. I didn't interrupt Hugo before his statement, but I do think that as far as, or do we have one more public commenter? Yeah, I signed up for public comment. I wasn't sure what had happened. Helen Cho.
Oh, okay.
I guess you can come.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make this quick. Hello, I'm speaking tonight to urge the HCDC to consider 2 points in their discussion of the proposed amendments to the RLTO tonight. First, there's a clear need for transparent, good faith engagement with just cause, instead of calls to excise it from the agenda altogether. While there is a need to engage with Ms. Lowen's arguments in the memo, which the Open Communities op-ed in the Evanston Roundtable did today, the memo should not dictate the conversation. The proposed amendments are just that, a proposal, a starting place for discussion. There is no need to adopt them in adopt these measures verbatim, but there is a need to talk about them in good faith and reach a compromise that best serves our community. HCDC community members should keep in mind the reason for good faith engagement is to create a more just housing landscape in Evanston. Second, we need to have data-driven conversations about just cause. HCDC should not ignore the careful research previously conducted by city staff on just cause in other localities. There is a need to integrate this data into the conversation. And while this contextual understanding of how just cause operates in different localities is important, there is also a clear need for more data pertaining to Evanston's housing landscape. Here I'm defining data expansively, not just as a set of numbers that abstractly tell us about trends, but the kind of data generated through community engagement. If the purpose of revising Evanston's RLTO is to serve vulnerable populations, then there needs to be more effort put into having an inclusive dialogue about just cause. Not everyone has the time or resources to attend HCDC meetings and make their voices heard. This kind of qualitative data, such as focus groups or interviews with various stakeholders, would provide rich insight and more transparency into the kinds of housing situations that Evanston residents face and how just cause could address them. In conclusion, HCDC can best serve Evanston through transparent engagement of its communities. 2 concrete ways to do this are through soliciting public input, especially from vulnerable communities, and engaging in good faith discourse and compromise on what kind of just cause amendments would work best for Evanston. I urge the Housing and Community Development Committee to engage in the challenging work of dialogue amid difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, they are.
I spoke in place of Jefferson here, but I was still at my time. Also, there's a Darlene Tenant waiting to speak.
I have no knowledge that anybody else is waiting to speak.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chair, I just wanted to point out a point of order. I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Rodriguez's, well, I want to wait because this is for the chair.
Okay. Sorry, I can't. Okay. Okay. She's the only one left. She was the one that deferred. Yeah, okay. Right, so.
Thank you. So I just want to enter a point of order. I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Rodriguez, Committee Member Rodriguez, as he was making a statement, but public comment is for the public, and I particularly think that if a committee member wants to engage in public comment, they should typically, one, just not do that because we're committee members, and so we should speak from the dais here. But if you are a committee member who wants to engage in that, I would recommend in the future that folks step down from the dais, because giving a pronouncement from the dais that is not about committee business, I think is
As a point of order, too?
It's out of order. It's quite literally out of order on the agenda. There is an area at the end of the agenda for new business or for other considerations, but certainly at the top of the meeting, and in the style of public comment from the dais is not.
I was the person who characterized it as public comment. But.
Oh,
As a point of order, I requested Chair Revelle to give me time as soon as the meeting started. She could do it after the minutes were approved. She chose to give me the time right now, so that's why I took it, not to be disorderly.
Yeah, right. And pointing it out for everyone's edification, and that's why I did not interrupt you when you're.
So going forward, if committee members do want to make statements, like, we'll put that at the end of our meeting. Okay. And Darlene Cannon, are you still there? Did you want to give public comment?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So Darlene Cannon, Second Ward, Chair of the Equity Commission. Tonight I'm speaking as a lifelong Evanston resident. And I just want to chime in to what Hugo said. Thank you very much, as well as William, as well as what Gail said as well. This is, a travesty as to what is happening to the residents of Wesley. For residents, for a city that's priding itself on being the first city to pass reparations, and we are evicting a bunch of elderly seniors. We're displacing them. Just some of the things that what Evanston values over Black lives. We spent $74 million on reparations. We felt it very important to bail out Lil Bean. $2.6 million, $1.7 million on the skate park. Animal shelter, $9 million. Fountain Square redo, $2.8 million. Main Street businesses, $50K. Not to say that it's not valuable to help the businesses when you're redoing the street, but there was no question, no doubt for that. But we can't help these people. We can't say that we're doing reparations while we're simultaneously still causing harm. We could have spent ARPA funds to help these people. We knew this just didn't come up overnight. This has been building up over and over and over again. And we know that developers have been after this land. This just didn't happen overnight. Robin knew about it. Dolores Holmes knew about it. Lots of people knew about it, that this has been a land grab and that this has been in the works for a long time. And it's really a shame that people have been quiet while they displace these elderly Black people. It is a shame. And, as far as, Councilmember Burns calling me a liar, I'm not going to even acknowledge that. It's classless.
Darlene,
that's it. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now let's get into our agenda, and we have 2 sets of minutes to approve.
Move approval of both sets of minutes.
Okay. Any questions or comments, discussion about the minutes?
I'll second.
Yes, please. Okay, thank you. All in favor of approval of our minutes of our January 29th special meeting and our March 29th regular monthly meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Are you doing them together?
Yes.
Because I was not present at the
Oh,
January
sorry.
29th.
Okay, yeah, then we need to do them separately.
You can,
Thank you.
You can either vote no or just.
Okay, so can we go back? Let's
Let's
start with
move
January
approval
29th.
of the January 29th special meeting minutes.
Just point of information, just for future use. Does a committee member have to recuse themselves if they weren't at a meeting?
I think they should abstain from voting on the minutes, yeah.
Not if we're voting for both
If-
minutes at the same time.
If the committee member has not reviewed the recording, then I think it would be appropriate for them to abstain.
Ms. Sloan, do you have a legal opinion on that, whether or not that's required?
Thank you, Councilmember Reed. Catherine Penrose-Lone, Assistant City Attorney. I can check, but my instinct is that if someone was not here to be able to vote yes, that it was accurate, then perhaps they should not vote on that issue, but I will double check.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the absence of a firm decision on this, committee member, council member Heracars has moved approval of the January 29th meeting minutes. Could I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say, whoops. I guess we need a roll call if we're trying to determine who was and wasn't here.
Councilmember Harakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Committee Member Rodriguez?
Abstain.
Committee Member Zalomi?
Aye.
Committee Member Berlin?
I think you missed the March 29th.
I did.
Yeah, so this one you were.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was in the
I
restroom.
think.
Aye.
Committee Member Thurston? Aye. Chair Ravel?
Aye. Okay, so the minutes of the January 29th special meeting are approved, and could we now have a motion for the approval of our March 29th
So moved.
meeting?
Second.
Okay, and could we have a roll call?
Councilmember Harakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Committee Member Rodriguez?
Aye.
Committee Member Zalomi?
Aye.
Committee Member Berlin?
Abstain.
Committee Member Thurston? Aye. Chair Ravel?
Aye. Is that your light? Whose light is on? Oh, that's the legal light. I'm sorry, I'm not used to.
My apologies. I stand corrected. There is not, it expressly states.
Your mic, I don't think, is on.
We can't quite hear.
Apologies. The fact that someone was not at a meeting for which the minutes are being approved does not prevent that member from participating in approval or correction. So,
All
may
right.
vote.
Now we know for next time. Okay. So I'm just going to give us all a quick overview of how we're going to work our way through this multi-part agenda. Beg your pardon?
I'm sorry.
Did you? Oh,
I was just talking.
okay. So first, the main part of our meeting is to discuss and ultimately, I assume, vote to recommend to City Council approval of the 13 amendments to the RLTO that we've been discussing at great length and and especially at our January special meeting. And then before we get into the 13, we're going to talk first about the most recent amendment that staff has proposed that's in the version that we're going to be talking about tonight, about the lease renewal notice. So we'll talk about that separately, agree or disagree, whatever, vote to approve it, and then move into considering the whole amended RLTO and go through the 13 items that we've discussed before, just to make sure everybody's okay with what we're about to approve. And then at the very end of all that, we will vote on a motion to approve, recommending to City Council approval of the amended RLTO. Then we're going to be discussing the three additional items, the three additional amendments that we have discussed, but we never really felt that we had substantial agreement about: the right of first refusal, the notice of reason for non-renewal, and the housing provider mitigation fund. And then also we'll talk about the just cause provisions, and we'll ask our legal staff to give us an overview of, discuss the memo that was in our packet. And then we'll decide how we want to proceed with those other four items that are not part of the amended RLTO. Questions? Councilmember Reed.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I will, if possible, I will move item A. So I'll move item A, which are the amendments to Evanston's residential landlord and tenant ordinance to include new housing policies and better align with the county's RLTO.
Okay, great. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, great.
And, oh, sorry, I'll flip on my light again.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And then on that, I would like us to, I want the RLTO adopted, but I would like us to take a step back, because I do not think it is good policy for us to move forward part of their RLTO and not the rest of it, which would be the just cause, the other items. If we're not going to include those in the RLTO, so be it. I'm going to fight like heck to get them in there. But I think, adopting part of the RLTO and then coming back a few weeks later and updating the RLTO is not the best strategy. And so I encourage us to have the discussion today, but then at the end of the day, not move forward with the RLTO and bring it back to the next meeting and adopt all of this as one package. That would be my recommendation. And I'm not quite clear, and someone can correct my memory, staff particularly, when this committee voted to separate the two.
Staff want to recapitulate that for us?
Good evening, Chair Ravel and members of the Housing and Community Development Committee. It wasn't officially voted on, as I recall, but it was discussed, having reached no conclusions at the January 29th. We proposed that we come back with the 13 for the committee's consideration and vote to update the RLTO, and then discussion on the other items.
Yes. Councilmember, Lauren Merlin, please.
Lauren,
go ahead.
yep, that's me.
That's it.
I was strongly and can remain strongly in favor of keeping them separate. I think my recollection here is that there seemed to be a good deal of consensus around a good portion, maybe not all, but a good portion of the RLTO, and that there was significantly more debate and lack of agreement around just cause. And in the spirit of being able to make incremental improvements where we can, it seemed to make sense to go ahead and move forward with them not linked, because coupling them is I don't actually think it's clear that they are two pieces of the same thing, and B, not necessarily going to get us some movement in the near term as quickly as we would like. So I think that was the thinking, as I recall that meeting.
Councilmember Harakaris.
So, question for staff: if we pass the RLTO tonight, when would we see this at council? And we typically have 2 readings at council, but what would the soonest that this would be enacted if it passes tonight?
I would expect the soonest it could get to council would be the 2nd May meeting. I don't have that date in my head. And then the subsequent 1st June meeting for the actual ordinance. We didn't.
And then our next meeting here for this committee would be the
third Tuesday.
Third Tuesday in
In May.
May, okay.
Mhm.
So potentially we could come back if there was some consensus and have the other items for action, and then we could, it'd be a month delay, 2 weeks delay.
That would be doable, I think.
Just point, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Is that enough? Yeah, okay.
Just
Go
point
ahead.
of order. My question was more of a procedural one. I get that folks have a feeling that they should be separated, but procedurally, the way committees take action is they vote on things. And so that's why I think if we want to separate them, we should vote on that as a committee. And two, as a question for staff, the just cause ordinance is going to be in the section of code where the RLTO resides. Is that not correct? Ms. Lone, the just cause is going to be within the RLTO?
That would be my understanding if it was passed, although I don't know that any final decisions have been made on that.
As it's drafted now, it's drafted within the same place where the RLTO is, correct? Are folks not familiar with it?
It was included in the draft that was discussed.
As it's proposed now, we're not creating a new section of code.
Right.
We are putting the just cause within the RLTO.
I don't know which meeting it was discussed as part of the
It
code.
was quite a while ago.
So, Councilmember Reed, to your question, yes, it was proposed to be integrated into the existing Title V section that deals with housing providers and, the RLTO.
Thank you. So with that, and I don't think anyone here is proposing that we create a new section of code for this, they are linked. It is one piece of code, and I've just never seen the council move forward with a comprehensive rewrite of code and pass one part of it one meeting and then come back 2-3 weeks or a month later and pass another part. It's just, I think it does not help with cohesion and understanding of what the law is. It means that there are constant moving parts, and that's, to me, not a great way to make public policy. And so that is where my request for us to amend this all at once comes from. And I do think, as it was proposed and as it has been presented to us in one piece of legislation, that if we want to change that it is appropriate for a vote to take place to do so. Thank you.
Ugo, go ahead.
Thank you, and I take this opportunity because I normally don't get a chance to say that I agree with Mr. Reed. So I do, and I think it's part of the landlord-tenant ordinance. It's got to be everything in it. The part that I don't agree with him is that this is going to be pushed through for our next meeting or whenever it is that this committee then sends it to City Council or approves it to go to City Council. So my point on that is that I like to see a lot more discussion, especially when it comes to just cause and right of first refusal. So I think that, again, we have been rushing this through, and the conversation is not in depth enough to have an ordinance that is beneficial to the community at large, to the entirety of our community. I think that we're trying to benefit a portion here and a portion there, and we don't have a balanced ordinance that will be beneficial. Otherwise, unintended consequences are going to continue to come through, as the case of what Mr. Pace represented today on the sale of that building, that the consequence is that an affordable building, it will not be affordable because there is a huge mortgage now placed on that property that wasn't there before. Thank you.
Lauren.
Yeah, so just a quick question for, so I understand what we're doing tonight. Regardless of if we are going to do our vote RLTO and just cause this evening or not as a single package, do we have the flexibility to go item by item? I think there's some in here that are going to be easy to get consensus around, and some that I personally think we need a lot more information on. And it's not clear to me that I wouldn't vote in favor for based on what I have currently. And I imagine there are other people who feel the same way.
Okay. I mean, the idea was that the 13 items that are in the proposed amended RLTO were areas where we did have substantial committee member agreement. And so that was the idea for, we're going to go through and talk about each one to make sure people still answer any lingering questions people have. But then the idea was that at the end of that, we would feel comfortable approving the package, the 13.
The 13.
I mean, but, you know, if committee members felt strongly that they could delete certain sections. So, Joanne?
Okay. Well, my thing is that we would discuss, because I have notes, you know,
Okay.
things I want to discuss. So that was my concern.
Okay. Councilmember Harakaris?
So I would just like to suggest that I think there has been a fair amount of consensus over the first 13, but I think the way we usually do it in council is if there are any amendments or things we want to get pulled out, folks can make a motion, but I think we should just assume
Dig in.
that we dig in, and if anyone has an item, discuss it one by one, but I think the majority of these we have had pretty robust discussion about.
My understanding was that we were going to have discussion about these 13 points today.
Right.
And we were going to hear from legal department about the issues that are still floating up.
Right. Before we get to the issues that are, the issues that are not part of the package, my expectation, my hope was that we were going to vote to approve the package with the 13 amendments that we already have discussed quite a bit, so that could be moving on to city council. And then we would talk about how we wanted to proceed, if at all, excuse me, with the other 4 items, including just cause. And if we decide and agree that we do want to continue working on just cause, if I recall, I want to remind everybody about the items that are on this committee's agenda already for the next 6 months. We would have to have some special meetings to be able to deal with the just cause amendment, because that's my thought. So, Ugo.
Thank you. So can we make comments on the 13 items, or are we just,
Sure, okay.
the
Right.
expectation is just to
Right, so
approve them?
we've had a motion to approve the package. And did we have a second for that? We did, okay. So yes, now we could either go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way through, or you could pull out, ones that you want to pull out.
If I can suggest that we just pull things out.
Sure,
that folks
okay.
wanna pull out.
So, Ugo, you wanted to.
Yeah, I think I will pull them all out, except maybe one.
Why don't I let you pull out 1 or 2, and then we'll let somebody else pull
And the
out.
pulling out is for what? To discuss it?
To discuss if you have questions or concerns.
Okay, let's start with 1 and 2. Or 1 and 3.
I think
Not
maybe
three,
you can
but
just go one at a time.
So you're,
Did she say 2?
so number one is limit late fees to $50 or 5% of the rent, whichever is lower. And number 3 was require that application fees, move-in fees, et cetera, be based on actual costs and disclosure of those fees. So did you have a question or concern about those?
Yes, I do. And, well, I have a comment to that, and it is that if this becomes a financial burden to housing providers, it will become a permanent rent increase. Absolutely. The limit is $50, and that's for a $1,000 rent, and the limit is $50 for a $2,500 rent. Same as for a $3,800 rent, but the consequences to the landlord that has a larger mortgage are not $50. We cannot go to our bank and say, hey, listen, Evanston says only $50 for late fees. I still have to pay the late fee, especially if I'm counting with those rents. We're talking about the small landlords, like many here. So that is a big problem. That is going to be an unintended consequence that it will go and be on the pockets of the tenants, ultimately. I can live with that for a year. And if I have a tenant that is chronically late, it's costing me money every time I have to dish out of my pocket what is not intended to pay the part that it's from the rent that I go and pay my rent is going to be coming out of my pocket. So the unintended consequence is that ultimately I'm going to increase that rent. Period. Thank you.
Am I correct in thinking, though, that the rent needs to be paid, it can only be up to 10 days late? Is that
Correct.
correct? So,
That is,
yeah, okay. Lauren, did you want to comment on that? No, sorry. Oh, okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah, and I've got all these buttons that have wrong names on them. Anyway.
oh, sorry, I'm
Reed, go
at
ahead.
Burns. Yeah. So I'm unclear. So one thing I want to note is, we often say this to our colleagues on council, the way we change policy here is making a motion. So I think if folks want to just make comments, perfectly within your right to just make comments. But if you don't want to see something, or you want to see something, then a motion is the appropriate way to deal with that. And I think it's important that we make those motions so we don't get to the end of the list of 13 and then we have to go back and relitigate, the issue. So I think to Mr. Rodriguez, if your goal is to pull that out or make an amendment or a change to it and make it $100, $300, whatever your case is, please make a suggestion in a motion.
I think that's a good idea.
All right. And my apologies. I am not familiar with the council system. I am not a council member. I'm just a resident of the city of Evanston. So my recommendation would be to leave the 5% as it is. It's 5%. To limit it to $50, I think that is where the trigger is. If the rent is $1,000, so be it. It's $50. But if the rent is $2,000, then it's $100. And I think that is the fair approach for everybody, because otherwise the consequence is going to be a rent increase. And if the tenant is chronically late, what are we going to do? 10 days? I understand that the time for this is 10 days for the late fee. What happens at the 11th day? My choice is to evict them or start eviction, or what is it? So I still need to pay the mortgage, and I need to pay the taxes, and I need to pay the water, and I need to pay the heat, or whatever it is that the landlord has to be dishing out every month. So we count on the rents. I know many families that own small buildings in Evanston. Many. I've sold many, and I work with many of them. They don't own the buildings free and clear. This is not money to their pockets. This is just their home, and they're paying for it just like everybody else. So I will move to change it to 5% and leave it at 5%. Thank you.
Is there a second? Lauren, you have your light on. Did you want to speak to that? Go ahead.
Can I make a different move?
You can.
Okay. So I think if the goal here is really affordable housing, then I would suggest an alternative. I understand the rationale, and I agree with the idea that late fees can be an important source of income to a property owner, for sure. So if we're thinking about affordable housing, I think the research I've seen a lot is like $600 a month as a benchmark, right? For people are earning $24,000 at that point if you're using a 31% DT. So if we say it's $600 a month for people with extremely low incomes, let's say $1,200 a month would give you a household income about $48,000. In Evanston, that's probably still a pretty tight budget, depending on what your household income is. So I would be comfortable saying something like, it's X amount. You know, I looked at the Chicago ordinance real fast. They say it's $10. It could be $50, whatever, but up to whatever we think that threshold is that is genuinely serving households that are the most financially vulnerable that we're trying to protect. So maybe it's 600, maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 1,200, but some sort of cap after which point it can be the 5%. So that's similar to what Chicago has. They're saying $10 up to $1,000 and then 5% above that, if I'm reading it correctly. So I think that protects people who really are on a tight budget, right? If we're talking about people, I mean, how many units are renting in Evanston for under $600 a month? It's got to be very
Almost zero.
small, right? So maybe we go up to 1,200, right? So if you're under 1,200, you have some sort of just fixed protection, and above that, it can be 5%. Like at some point you're hitting market rates or closer to market rates. I don't know what they are for one unit or a studio. So I could see some sort of graduated that accounts for protecting people, households that are the most vulnerable. I don't know if people are looking at me like I'm not making sense. That's my move.
Motion has to.
My motion.
Right.
I'm not clear on the motion. So are you setting a limit? Are you saying 1,200? Are you saying?
Yeah, we could cap them at like $20 for 1,200. I mean, I'm open to idea. Someone else make a move, but like $20 for 1,200, and then 5% or whatever sort of is, something like that. But let's create this protection that we're trying to create to protect affordable housing and households in affordable housing, and then let's allow the market to do what the market needs to do above some certain household income. Because landlords do have to make money. I mean, Ugo is exactly right. If we are not careful, rates will permanently rise and credit profiles will go up, exponentially because of the additional risk on landlords. So yeah.
Okay. So we don't exactly have the wording, but.
Well, the wording, I
concept.
mean, Chicago is saying late fees are capped at $10 for the first 1,000, and after that, they're 5% of overall rent.
Okay. Okay.
That strikes me as pretty straightforward and creating a carve out for financially most vulnerable families.
Okay. Yeah, Joanne, we haven't heard from you.
Okay, I think I would want a minimum of $25, $10, is not much, it's so, but if they pay $25 up to $1,200.
Don't forget to.
Oh, and then, 5% above $1,200 is fine with me.
Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I just want to remind us that I appreciate the research that you did, particularly using the the housing calculator that folks ideally would pay 30% of their income, but we do know that far too many folks in Evanston are housing burdened. They're paying far more than 30% of their income for their housing, and we're also saying that in a $2,000 rent, for example, which is a fairly, moderate rent in the city, unfortunately moderate rent in the city of Evanston, we're saying that person, if they're 1 day late on rent, that they have to pay an extra $100?
No, it's 10 days.
No, 10 days is before you can evict, but if someone.
No, you have 10 days before you're.
Before someone can apply a late fee? Is that correct? Can legal staff correct us on that? Because my understanding,
you have 10 days.
if someone is 1 day late, you can apply a late fee, and it's not 10 days. Can people, if you don't know the answer, please?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's usually set forth in the lease agreement as to when a late fee would apply.
Right, and as someone who has had as I think the only renter that's sitting here now, thank you, Ms. Sloan. Certainly, I can say that if you're even a day late, sometimes a housing provider will give you 2-3 days, whatever. It's set forth in the agreement. There is no law that says someone has to wait 10 days before they can apply a late fee. And so I want us to be clear on that. And it's just somewhat scary that so many housing providers are so confused on some of these things.
I have two comments on that, and one is if I remember correctly, one of the points that this amendment to the Landlord Tenant Ordinance was presented with was that to require a 1/3 income was excessive, that we should be more liberal with that we should allow a higher percentage of their income to be applied to rent. That is just one. But I wanted to ask Ms. Sloan if we could go to the model lease of the city of Evanston and see what that says in terms of the late payment, because there is a model lease for a reason in the city of Evanston.
Well, why was everyone saying 10 days just a second ago?
But you were saying 1 day.
Well, the model lease is not law, to be clear. The model lease is just a model lease.
Yeah.
So the law would allow 1 day.
But if you sign a lease with 1 day, it's your problem.
Who's this, an attorney that said this?
So Sarah, do we know what, or yes?
I was just going to say, the issue with state laws, you always have to be concerned about home rule and whether it was
Right.
expressly preempted in the state law. So I would have to research that, but my experience with most of the landlord-tenant provisions of state law are that they are not expressly preempting home rule.
Yeah, Lauren.
So I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of back and forth this evening. I just want to say on the question of how should we be thinking about who we're serving, I'm going to be really honest. I mean, I think at some point we do have to draw a line. And you're right, cost burden rates in this country are the highest they've ever been. More people are spending more than 50% severe cost burdens. More renters are severely cost burdened than have ever been in the nation. More renters are cost burdened. More people are homeless. The crisis is evident, but we can't solve all of it. And I think trying to think holistically about where there's real opportunity that balances competing needs, not competing interests, but competing needs, means that sometimes maybe someone earning 200, it does suck. You're in the donut hole of this thing, and that sucks. But at some point, we draw some lines, and standard practice is 31% DTI. If you want to go to 50%, let's look into it. I don't know what 50% of household income in Evanston is. I'm just trying to find a place that feels like a reasonable way forward.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. So I've heard a motion, but I haven't heard a motion in a second on this particular item. And so I am interested in the actual.
Oh, 25%? Okay, I make a motion that the late fee be a minimum of maximum of $25 for rent up to $1,200 a month and 5% thereafter. And is there another spot that says when you impose it? Is there 10 days in here? Because I haven't memorized the whole
No.
ordinance.
I think it's in the lease. It's not in the ordinance.
Okay.
Well, I'll second that motion if we want to put it to a vote.
Right.
I second the motion. $25 up to $1,200, 5% beyond $1,200.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. And I hadn't given up my time yet. But so then again, what we're saying, right, we just mentioned numbers about more people than ever are housing burdened, sure, in our country, in our city, right here with the folks that I represent. And we're saying that a family of 3 or 4 that has a $2,000 rent and potentially is 1 day late on their rent is then going to have to pay $100 more because they're 1 day late in rent. And I don't know, and again, I don't think that the RLTO is meant to solve affordability but certainly I've heard folks here on the dais mention that. Certainly this doesn't help if we allow a law that says somebody paying $2,000 in rent has to pay $100 extra if they're 1 day late. Does not help with affordability. And to be clear, and if folks, please. Folks, hold on. Okay.
Okay.
Point being, is that, one, I don't know, you get 5% of 2,000 being 65, but I didn't, so that's not what, hold on, folks. That is not what I heard. What I heard was up to that if your rent is $1,200 or below, you would pay, the motion that was made, and Ms. Salome, please correct, $25. And if your rent is $2,000, you pay 5%, not the difference. You pay 5% total. Right. Is that not what your motion was?
Yes.
$100. Anyhow, point being is that doesn't help with affordability. That is I don't think that's the direction that we want to go. And unless we are going to put in provisions that say you can't charge the late fee up until 10 days after someone is late, then we're backsliding. And so, and also, I want to be clear. Cash flow is a part of any business. So to say that, that a housing provider is going to go bankrupt and not be able to pay their mortgage because someone was 5 days late on rent, to me is, if you can't afford to take on that hit, how do you afford the maintenance? How do you afford to pay when the heater goes out? How do you afford when you find out that there's mold in the walls? So cash flow is a part of the business, a part of any business, and I think that housing providers who choose to engage in purchasing excess housing and renting it out for profit have the same responsibility as any other business owner. And so I would oppose this change and encourage the folks on this committee to oppose this change, particularly if your goal, as has been stated by some folks, is to make sure that we aren't putting more burden on folks. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Harakaris.
Yeah, I just can't get behind raising this. This is the type, these late fees, this is the type of thing that just snowballs for like working class families. And, Councilmember Reed had good points about cash flow. Like, we've discussed a lot of this before, and it sounds like, folks are upset that they don't have this lever, but we're trying to produce a stable environment for renters and for housing providers, and I'm going to side with the renters, and I think we shouldn't raise it.
And so you're supporting the proposed amendment, or the original? The as is. Okay. Ugo.
Thank you. First I'm going to make a comment to the comment of Mr. Reed, which is that cash flow should be part of any business, and it is true, but where do you go order a hamburger and I come back and pay you for it tomorrow? You don't. You're getting housing, and that is part of your agreement, and it's debatable all day long. What I think should happen is that any education should be given to tenants to not take leases that demand late fees after 1 day of being late. I think that the common lease is 5 days. That's why we have the 5-day notice going on around. So it is very important that education is being passed to tenants and potential tenants. Thank you.
Okay. So one last comment from Councilmember Reed, and then I think we need to make a decision here.
I was hoping you were going to speak longer. I wanted to get some water. No, I'll say that, again, I don't think every point needs to be debated, but I do want to encourage my colleagues on this committee to vote against this. The idea that we can just educate residents to not accept leases, to me, comes from from an idea that it stems from not having lived experience. As a renter, you don't have a bunch of options about where you can go. In my ward, in the 8th ward, if you're looking for an apartment, an affordable apartment, it is extremely difficult. The housing stock is limited. The North Shore overall is a few months ago when we checked, it was over 97% occupied. And I think that has likely gone up given, I spoke to some landlords recently who said, all of my units are filled, and partially because we have over 50,000 new people who are in our area and looking for housing, namely migrants from other countries, and who deserve and need that housing. But it means that the housing market is even tighter and tighter than maybe it ever has been in this area. And so folks just don't have a lot of choice. I will admit, I get where folks are coming from with the proposal here. It is in good faith trying to balance. But I think when you look at it on, across the board, This does not achieve, I think, the goal that folks are looking for. And I think we had a discussion at a previous meeting, and I don't know if staff got information back to us on this, but my understanding is that, even mortgage lenders aren't as strict as this on maybe folks who own houses. Well, okay. Does anyone have an answer on that? If someone is, 5 days late, 10 days late on their mortgage, what are the fees that are associated with that? Can staff or anyone provide an answer to that?
Well, on my mortgage, on my 2-flat, it's 16 days, and I get a late fee.
And Lauren?
So
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, no, I've never been late. I don't remember what the late fee is.
No,
but-
you're not totally wrong. It depends on who owns your mortgage, right? So, but if like most home mortgages that got sold to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, where it's been securitized, there's a good chance that you're under federal guidelines that are going to give you 30 days, and they're going to help you, and they're going to give 60 days, they're going to help you, they're going to give you 90 days, and they're going to take your house. So that's, so you do have a longer time, potentially, for sure.
Also, another comment on that.
But you
now.
own the house. It's hard to make that an apples to apples comparison. But look, I'm not going to go to the mat on this.
Right.
I'm interested. I'm just trying. I just think there's so much. I'm very concerned about the long-term implications of some of these, and so I'm looking where I can to think beyond the short term. I think the urgent need is obvious in the short term. I'm just concerned about cutting off our nose to spite our face. But if people feel really strongly that late fees should be like this, I don't think this is the deal breaker in what happens to long-term housing. I just think the more we can preserve stock at rates that are more affordable than they will later be. Not that they're affordable, but more affordable, because the more we up the risk, the more this is going to be harder to get into housing. But I will stop objecting. It is
Okay.
fine. This
And
is not the one
just-
for me to go to the
right,
mat
and I
on.
would like to just say, if we can't come to an agreement on something here, then we're at our current ordinance has no limit on late fees. Is that correct? Right, so we need to figure something out here. Ugo.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
I asked a question. I wasn't quite done with my time.
Oh.
I'm just seeking a response to that question. Oh, good. I'm glad you guys are parliamentarians now. So I just want to finish up here, which is to the folks who responded, and particularly Ms. Berlin, I would encourage you to vote no then on this. I'm just looking around the room and I'm counting votes, and that's why I'm advocating for this. I know you seconded it. But given, your deep understanding there that housing providers and folks with mortgages have more than 10 days, they have 30 days, potentially, again, depending on who their lender is, have 16, 15, 30 days, folks, we should not cost burden folks. Again, if they're beyond the 10 days, the housing provider has the right to move toward eviction and utilize all of the tools there. But this should not be a way that folks are, gaining income or figuring out how to. The goal here is to incentivize folks to pay on time. Thank you.
Chloe, we haven't heard from you.
So, my understanding, though, is we're already starting with no limit, right? And just debating what limit to place. I think that the sort of Chicago limit seems pretty valid. There's a model. We have a model of another city that's already done it, and it does balance the need to preserve sort of protections for the most vulnerable with the fact that you have many people who aren't, who can also sort of afford to pay a little bit more.
Okay, Ugo.
And to clarify that, Chloe, it is the $25, and then after the $1,200, 5% on the balance. That's what the City of Chicago ordinance reads.
Can we I don't think that was what
That's not what Joanne.
Joanna said, but I would be happy to rephrase and suggest that as an amendment, which also slows the sort of progression a little bit. And I think that seems,
I don't know what it is in Chicago. The link to the Chicago one is pretty vague, but we could incrementally do it, above 1,200. It's the difference, which is how you get to the 65. It's the math on that, the difference, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to just make one comment, and it is that it's being disregarded the effort that small landlords have made, the sacrifices that those families have made to acquire their properties. It is treated here with a lot of disregard, and I think that to imply that these owners are rolling in cash and every emergency, every situation for these landlords could be dramatical for their families. It could be having to diet longer than they expected because they have to remediate more or cure problems that those properties have. I know that these people are not rolling in money, so it is best to have that in mind, as well as the well-being of the tenants of the city of Evanston. Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor that's been seconded, and it's, actually, we've tweaked it a little bit to get that progressive.
Did we make a friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'm open to a friendly amendment.
Okay. So does somebody want to try to restate that?
Sure that I could.
Yep, Lauren.
Up to $1,200, the late fee is capped at $25. Above $1,200, the first dollar over $1,200 is 5% of the rent.
Up to no limit.
I mean, look, if your rent's $8,000, good for you, and you should pay your late fees.
Okay.
You know?
Sarah?
I have a suggestion. You can say it can be no more than. They can always charge less if they choose.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
So is it they choose an operating word here? If they choose?
Well, what I mean
No
is.
more than.
Could
No
you-
more than.
We don't
Yeah.
allow them to do more than that. In other words, you put that in that can be no more than 5% of the rent.
Oh,
That doesn't mean that somebody has to charge 5%,
Correct.
is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I do have the Cook County,
Okay,
would you like to hear that?
sure.
Cook County's is setting late fees of more than $10 if the rent is $1,000 or below, and more than $10 plus 5% for any amount of rent over $1,000. Kind of complicated.
They have it summarized just as they're capped at $10 for the first 1,000, and after that, it's 5% of overall rent. So ours is still more conservative than
Right.
Cook County because
Right.
we're graduating the difference.
Right, because they're
point
saying
of
setting
order.
$10 if the rent is 1,000 or below, and more than $10 if, plus 5%, because they're doing the $10 plus the 5% is what Cook County is doing, right?
Okay. So, excuse me, are we ready to vote on?
I'm sorry, can someone restate the motion?
Please.
Okay, I think the motion is $25 up to $1,200, beginning with a rent that is more than $1,200, beginning above $1,200. It can be no more than 5% of the rent, and it's differentiated, right? So if your rent is $2,000, you're still covered up to $1,200 with just the $25. So the difference between $2,000 and $1,200, that $800 is what you would get the 5% on, which is where that $65 additional, you're right, fee would be to that household. Yes. So that's the proposal. That's the proposal.
Point of order, I just want to make sure, because the folks who are actually going to do this are law department, so is that clear to staff in the law department?
My understanding is that it would be my understanding is that it would be $25 for rents up to $1,200, and for rents $1,200 or more, it would be $25 plus a maximum of 5% of whatever is over $1,200.
Thank you. Yes, and then if there, another friendly amendment, if folks would be willing to raise that $25 and the first cap from $1,200 to $1,600, I think that's reasonable for the committee. So I'm here seeing a yes from the maker of the motion, so the friendly amendment is made, and I will support that.
Okay, so
1,600
is the first number.
Did I hear 14?
What is 1,600 times 3? 48. So that, I know we can disagree, but using a DTI of 40, so that gives you 4,800 a month in annual in income.
Ideally.
Ideally,
Yeah.
yep, ideally. So you're coming in around what, like 56,000 for annual income in Evanston? Yeah, I'm fine with 1,600 personally. Others can push back. It's just my opinion. I'm okay with that. I think that's tight in Evanston.
Okay.
I second.
Okay,
right.
so we have,
The last of the friendly amendment?
Yes.
I hope, okay. Oh, all right. Shall we have a roll call?
Or you can do a voice vote.
Sure, okay. All in favor of the motion to
The amendment?
amend the late fee as just described, please say aye.
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 Opposed, no? All right. We've got, yeah.
One down.
No, we have,
No. Right,
already
right,
did one.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
So how about, so that was Ugo's. Ugo, can we let somebody else pick a number next?
Sure, if I
Okay.
can come back to the numbers
Sure,
that I
right,
think
right,
that
yeah.
I
So
have
does anybody
objections to.
else have one of these that they want to talk about and amend or whatever? Yes, Joanne.
Number 10, the 90 days and the 30 days.
Okay.
You know, so I just think that's too big a difference there, that I would rather see a 90 days and that the tenant has to say whether they're going to renew the lease 60 days. Because it gives the landlord more
Microphone.
time. Oh, sorry. So change the 90 days for giving the notice of non-renewal, or, you know, it's also presenting, that's for non-renewal. But I'm also saying, I want to go with the same type of thing for when you're requesting that a landlord, where it's, whatever part it says where a landlord can't request, let me go to that section, because that's the one where we had an amendment on, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which we didn't discuss.
Yeah, we jumped right into.
Okay, so this is, okay, a non-renewal for lease, 30 days to 90 days, limit the required to renew a lease, that the tenant should give a reply 60 days, so the landlord has more time to rent the apartment.
Okay. So give us a moment to find that section here.
and just point of information, is there a time frame that you're recommending? Are you saying?
60 days.
60 days?
Yeah, because, well, I mean, that gives the tenant more time to look for something else too, you know, because it's going to take a while to find something.
I'm not sure to follow your proposal, Joanne. Could you
So the
present it
period for
again?
non-renewal, 90 days. And then limit the time that the tenants can be required to respond to a lease renewal to 60 days. So there's two things in here. The way, you know,
Right,
but
yeah.
are they on the, they're, well, but we, you know, I thought we were going to vote on the new amendments you
Well,
put in.
we were going to, and then we got sidetracked.
Yeah, right.
Yes, right. yeah.
Okay, so the renewal or refuse to renewal section, I think in both, if the landlord has to provide notice of non-renewal or present a lease 90 days prior to termination of a lease, then the tenant, written notice, tenant no less than 90 days.
Are you open to a friendly amendment, Joanne?
Well,
There's
you
no
know, I
motion
think I'm
yet.
talking about two different things here. So let's do, if we do one at a time. So if non-renewal, they have to give 90 days prior to termination. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
when the.
It's
when
when
the.
you give somebody a lease, you have to give them 90 days, but the tenant only has to say whether they're going to stay or not 30 days ahead. I want that to be 60 days.
So just for a point of order, for a point of information for my understanding of the motion. So what you're saying is that someone looking for housing would have 30 days to find housing in a market that's 97% occupied, but someone trying to fill that potentially vacant unit would have 60 days to find a new tenant in a 97% occupied market?
No.
We're only talking about, the only place where how much time the tenant has, that's just as it deals with the opportunity to renew.
So I think what, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying here is continue to allow landlords to have to give 90 days notice whether or not they're going to renew. But instead of saying the tenant only has to give 30 days notice, you're asking that the tenant has to give 60 days notice. Personally, I'm uncomfortable with that. I think it takes a lot longer to find a unit. I understand the point that it potentially gums up things on the landlord side. Maybe 45, but I just don't think that a tenant who is given 90 days notice is going to know 30 days later if they have found housing. I'm concerned that we're forcing them to make a decision without enough information. And obviously we all do, but in case of housing, like, you have to have a place to go at the end of the day.
Chair Rivera, I think that there is a confusion here, and the confusion is between the non-renewal, meaning I'm not going to renew your lease, the requirement would be 90 days.
Correct. Yep.
But if I am offering to renew the lease,
I misread it.
then, exactly, I think that that's what's happening
Right.
here,
So
is that
that's-
we have
yeah, that's-
misread that.
that's the
So,
part we're
could I
looking at.
finish? It is that right now, the tenant will have up until 30 days before that renewal becomes in effect to say yes or no. The problem with that is that landlords, 30 days is too short of a notice for a landlord to market, make repairs, repaint, whatever needs to be done to that apartment, and be ready for a new tenant. So what I like to present is that we give the tenant more notice for the tenant to respond within 60 days of that renewal, before that renewal becomes in effect. So we can give the tenant 75 days ahead notice. We're renewing the lease. So if the tenant chooses to move out, it's a different story. So does that make sense? If I could
think
finish.
you're gumming it up and you're confusing what the motion was about.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
We're focused on
we'll see.
the right thing. Okay. Councilmember Harakaris.
So this, before we discussed the RLTO, I had a referral that was basically this, and it's fair notice that happened. They do it in Chicago. In Chicago, depending on how long you've stayed in your apartment, it's up to 120 days notice. Now, the thing is,
We're talking about renewal.
renewals.
Renewing, not.
renewals. Yeah, there's no. So the
No, I
reason
didn't
why
make
you
a
want a
motion,
longer,
I just discussed.
and I know everyone's talking about, the time frame, like what's fair. Why do we give the tenants? Why do we have to give them 90 days notice? If you're a housing provider, the 30 days notice, you can't make a lot of those updates and changes until they leave anyway. Like, I think 30 days is enough time. Like, they have to vacate the apartment before you paint or do any of those things.
I don't think there is a fight back on the 90 days
90
for
days, what I'm
non-renewal. I don't think that there is
But-
an issue there, at
So
least
what-
not on my part.
Okay. So I'm also uncomfortable making it requiring the renter to have 60 days. If you are renting and you might not know 60 days ahead. So I don't want to force people to make that decision until the 30-day notice like we have currently. So because I don't see it as a burden on the housing provider if they have, because they have to The tenant has to
they
move
will
out
have an
before they
open
make-
offer to renew their current
Yeah.
lease. So if they choose to move out, they will be given enough time for them to look out and see what they find, and they find that, hey, I'm better off where I am, so I'm going to stay. So let me know within 60 days of the renewal date. That's it. It's just very simple. And if they decide, no, I'm done with you, or I'm moving to Gurnee or Wisconsin or whatever, then that's fine. And go find your apartment. But give me 60 days notice that you are not taking the renewal on my lease. I think that is fair for everybody. The tenant is being given more time ahead of the 60 days
30
to, the way I'm proposing it is ahead of the 60 days. So you can make your motion, but I'm moving to leave the 90 days for not renewal notice, increase the lease renewal notice to 90 days, and after 30 days, the tenant has to tell the landlord if they'll stay or if they'll move out.
So, point of order.
That is my motion.
Okay, so, do we have a second? Second.
Point of order, just a point of information. I understand that motion because there's a lot there. So essentially what you're saying is that we'd only give the tenant 30 days, right? Because if the housing provider has to give the tenant a notice 90 days ahead, and then the tenant has to respond 60 days ahead, the tenant has 30 days.
Right.
So my original point was, what we're saying is we're giving folks,
Okay,
and so you summed it up.
so Councilmember Reed, a couple of other people have their lights on, so Chloe, let me go to you next.
Thanks. Okay, so first, I was just wondering what stops, there's nothing that prevents a landlord from asking, sort of saying it would be great if you could tell me sooner, right? And if they have a good relationship, that should be. Is there anything that would prevent them, I couldn't find it in the text, but from offering like a discount on a month's rent or something, or some sort of incentive? Is that prohibited in the text of the RLTO?
I think that would have to be kind of a voluntary sort of.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But I'm asking if it is something that like could be, it's plausible. So I'm just curious. I guess that my issue with that sort of, moving to a sort of 30 days is not very much time to shop. So if you're just trying to figure out whether you can leave now that you've sort of gotten this option to renew, it's not a lot of time to check out the market. And I think the other challenge is if we go with Committee Member Rodriguez's proposal of 60 days, the way that the market works, someone might end up having to sign a new lease kind of before they have to move out of the other one. It tends to move kind of quickly. And so that also seems a bit problematic, I guess. So I'm not entirely sold on that as a compromise.
Okay. Is this you, Joanne, or is it? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, well, I think, if they only have to tell the landlord 30 days ahead, are they going to find something in 30 days?
Oh, they can look.
With the tight market, whether it's here or anywhere, whether they stay in Evanston or not, I don't think 30 days is enough time for them to
Well,
find something.
the tenant has all the time in the world. The tenant could start looking 6 months ahead.
Well, yeah.
Right. It's
They
just
could,
when does the tenant have to notify the landlord?
Yeah.
Legal, is your light on here?
It is indeed. Thank you, Chair Ravel. I just wanted to clarify a bit. I hope it doesn't muddy things, but what the Chicago ordinances are in this regard. The fair notice provisions in Chicago are where it's staggered based on how long you've been in the thing, is only for non-renewal. The rules in Chicago as to renewal of leases is that a landlord cannot require a tenant to renew and more than 90 days out, and that's it. And I know because I've been a renter in Chicago for 27 years.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So do we have a motion before us?
Yes, there's a motion and a second from Mr. Rodriguez.
Okay, could someone remind all of us what the motion is?
My pleasure. The required notice from a housing provider to a tenant for non-renewal of the lease will be from 30 days to 90 days.
If I can just clarify this, because there's really just one move that we're making here, and so just to cut through, the move is that
I was making my motion.
your motion is made, but I
clarifying
think we're
my-
clarifying it. And
Yeah.
I think the easiest way to clarify it is that the language that would change within the ordinance is that a tenant would have to provide notice to their housing provider 60 days ahead of the end of their lease. Yes.
I think that's your motion, isn't it, Ugo?
It is, but it's not the only part of it.
Well, I think that's the only thing you changed.
We're changing from 30 to 90 days, the requirement from a landlord to give notice to the tenant to not renew it.
Right. I think there's no argument about wanting to do that.
Okay, so, but the motion has to include that.
Oh, so you also want to do what, again? To take the landlord's notice down?
You wouldn't interrupt me, I could
he's
finish.
just-
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at the draft, Section A is the non-renewal part, and that goes that's going from the current 30 days up to 90 days. But there's no disagreement about that.
Correct.
So the question is what to do with item C. How much time should the tenant have? When should the tenant be required to notify the landlord that they are not renewing?
60 days.
And Ugo so the proposal that was in our packet was 30 days, and Ugo is proposing to amend that amendment to 60 days.
Correct.
Did we get a second for that?
Ms. Salome.
Yeah, otherwise, can I do a friendly amendment of 45 days if people are comfortable with 60?
Sure.
It's up to the maker of the motion.
Yeah. Hugo?
Ugo, are you comfortable with that?
If that is going to bring consensus, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Yes, I will just, in closing here, say that I would still encourage, I appreciate the amendment down to 45 days. I would still encourage everyone to vote no to this amendment. I think what we had in front of us originally is where we should be. So, thank you.
Meaning 30 days.
Meaning 30 days, correct.
Right, okay. I think we better have a roll call on this one. So the motion is that the tenant would have to respond to the housing provider 60 days.
45.
45 days, I guess, before the end of before the termination of the lease or something, yeah.
All right, Councilmember Harakaris.
No.
Councilmember Reed.
No.
Committee Member Rodriguez.
Aye.
Committee Member Zalomi. Committee Member Berlin.
No.
Committee Member Thurston.
No.
Chair Ravel.
No.
Motion fails.
Okay, so now we're back to the original motion, which is requiring the tenant to notify the landlord at least 30 days in advance of the end of the lease term. So should we have a roll call?
No, we haven't been voting on the things individually. As we've been doing is just pulling out, and so I think what this means is this one is settled.
But this one is actually new.
Oh, okay. Well, then I move the 30-day, thank you for that, Chair. I move the 30-day limit as proposed by staff.
Is there a second?
I second.
Second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Committee Member Rodriguez.
No.
Committee Member Zalomi. Committee Member Berlin.
Aye.
Committee Member Thurston.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passed.
Okay. All right. Who wants to propose any other? Are we happy with all the other items here, or
1 through 13. I think we still.
1 through 13 is what
Yeah.
we're talking about, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Ugo,
1 through
go ahead.
13.
And just as a point of order, just for us to be efficient with the time, if a majority of us are fine with the rest of the proposals,
Well, Ugo did have
I know,
another
if I
one.
can just finish my, just for efficiency, I do think that having a debate about all of these issues when there's consensus on them, isn't fruitful. And so what I would like to do, if I'm seeing consensus on the rest of the items, is call the question.
Well, I think we're not ready to do that because Ugo has already signaled that he had another.
We were asked to
That's the point of the
we
motion
were
to call
asked
the
to
question,
pull-
is to skip through unnecessary debate. If there's not consensus up here to move forward with any other changes, I think the efficient
But
use
let's
of.
at least hear what Ugo has to say about the
Well,
other
and
items.
he's asking to change the mode of operation of this
It's-
session
it's
for this
Robert's
committee.
Rules of
No,
Order.
no, no.
Please read Robert's Rules of Order in the council rules.
All right. So I'd like to talk about number 3.
Okay.
Require that application fees, move-in fees, and administrative fees be based on actual cost and disclosure of those fees. I have heard feedback that itemizing cost it's burdensome, which can increase administrative cost. I think that if this becomes a financial burden to housing providers, it will be an unintended consequence, and it will be permanent and increase on the rents. I think that we should think twice of that. I have not seen misuse of these fees in any case. If there is evidence to the contrary, it should have been presented to this committee before. And I think that we haven't had data to support a lot of the allegations that have made this proposal come to this committee.
Councilmember Harakaris.
So I can share my experience from when I was a renter. I never lived in any place nice enough that required application, move-in fees. That I see as very much a method of keeping people out. I mean, we've already had caps on security deposits, and I think this piece of the legislation goes really hand in hand with number 2, where you have providers that sometimes use like exorbitant security deposits or move-in fees and administrative fees to keep people out. I think most of like the people that I rented from didn't have any of these. It's just like, hey, pay your security deposit. So I don't think this is something I see that kind of problematic. Housing providers using this is like a barrier for entry for certain people. So I would like to keep it the way it is right now.
Yes. Lauren.
I had my.
I just had a question for Ugo. Is your concern the disclosure or this language actual costs? Because in terms of disclosure, personally, I think it's a good consumer protection, right? It's it's in all the mortgage docs. It's in other housing. It's in buying a car. Sometimes the loans, right? We try to have these consumer transparency. So I would just be, and I think that a landlord knows all these costs. So I don't think it should increase administrative work beyond taking their spreadsheet and cutting and pasting a couple of cells on their expenses and, slapping it in a Word document. But if I'm not but I just want to make sure because that's how I'm understanding it, but in case I'm missing something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Lauren. I think that this all derived mostly out of the unreasonable restrictions that the security deposits regulations for the city of Chicago were placed on landlords. And because landlords could not anymore keep security deposits, they started to implement move-in fees. That was an unintended consequence to the strong regulations. And the regulations, many of them were completely idiotic. Landlords were happy with having the security deposit when they rented an apartment, and this probably was before your time, Councilmember Harakaris, but it happened along the way with security deposits that the requirements from the city were so punitive, were so idiotic, that landlords decided to do away with security deposits and started creating these fees instead. So now I see that we're reverting back to allowing security deposits, but we don't really know what the regulations for the city of Evanston would be for those. To answer more directly your question, Lauren, yes and no. I can provide my spreadsheet and say, in average, a cleaning fee after a tenant moves or before a tenant has to move in, minor repairs that are routine will cost me this, typically. Processing your credit score, your credit reports, verifying your employment, how much you make, and all of that will cost me this much per adult moving into the household. So I can definitely create that. But there are so many variables on this. I'm just about to put a building on the market, and when I saw the spreadsheet, I go, what is this? That's what it costs us to clean the apartment after the tenants move. $1,300 and $1,200. So how does a landlord quantify that or justify that for one tenant? So the best way to do it is to spread it out. Unintended consequences of very strict and, in many cases, punitive and idiotic regulations on security deposits brought that up on. So we're creating something that could have unintended consequences here, and we're taking it very lightly. We're taking this very lightly. I don't think we have, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I don't think we have discussed this enough. We don't have enough consensus from both sides. I would like to meet with the tenant organizations and with landlords organizations, sit at a table and try to discuss all of this. But we're trying to push legislation into the city of Evanston without enough thought. So that is along of it.
Okay.
So.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. A few points here. One, Councilmember Hedekais, I appreciate your points, the points that you raised. I will say I personally, as a renter, prefer a move-in fee. It's a lot more affordable in the immediate term at times than certainly than a security deposit. Short-term benefit, long-term pain maybe for not getting the money back. But what we're saying here is at the core is that a housing provider just has to disclose what the fees are that they're using to your move-in fee toward, and it just gives the tenant transparency. And so, I don't even know if I don't think there's a motion here. Was there a motion? Do you have plans to make? Is your motion to? No, I know. Well, but is there? You're the one who pulled this one out. So, do you have a motion for this, or? I can put it in. Because my point here is that, again, I want to call the question because I do think there's a difference between good faith, a good faith desire to make amendments and change what is before us, and just objection. And if you don't support it, you just vote no.
Well,
but
we don't want him.
Can I finish my?
Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
trying to move us along here.
Well, that's certainly what I'm trying to do is
Right.
move us along so we don't just, I've worked on the task force. I don't think going each item by each item when there is no motion
I'm
is a
hoping
fruitful
we're not
use of
going to
time.
do that. I'm hoping that people only have maybe 2 or 3 others that they must talk about, maybe not even. So, Ugo, you can make a motion to, I guess, delete number 3, and then we'll see whether you get a second and whether we need to vote.
Excuse me 1 second. There are actually 2 parts in the actual written ordinance here that relate to this, and if I could read those, that might help clarify things.
Okay.
If you look in the general definitions for application fee, it says a fee charged by the housing provider to prospective tenants to cover the costs of processing a rental application and not offset against other fees. And the move-in fee says the fee that a housing provider charges to a tenant that is reasonably related to the housing provider's cost for a tenant moving into the dwelling unit, including but not limited to additional security costs or additional trash removal. I wanted to read those for you because just looking at the language in the bullet point, that's a summary of those two things, and I thought it might be helpful.
So, can I just, how about a show of hands from the committee about whether there's interest in pursuing this item, or are we happy leaving it in the amendment? So all in favor, all who are inclined to keep this number 3 in the amended RLTO, please raise their hand.
Don't believe we have do we have a second to that motion? Did we have a second to his motion to remove it from?
I don't think,
Or are you making a new
I don't think we ever
motion?
actually got a motion.
So I just procedurally speaking, I think the motion and the second and the vote is the
Okay,
proper way to do
okay,
it.
so we'll go make a motion, please.
Yes, so I move to eliminate the requirement to, in particular, to remove the disclosure of moving fees because it's just too vague.
Okay. Is there a second?
Just for clarity, are you saying the whole section of or are you just saying that particular point? It's fine that, we have the regulations around that move-in fees have to be related to move-in cost, but the only thing you want to delete is the disclosure of the move-in cost?
Correct.
So-
And the application fee is a separate point, so that's what I was saying, correct.
So can you make your motion, please, Ugo?
I just did. Yeah.
Okay, is there a second?
Okay, do you want to repeat that?
Sure. My motion is to remove the disclosure of moving fees from number 3.
Is there a second? So I think there's not a second. So I,
that means
whoops.
an itemization, right? Is that what we're saying? Because where is it? So besides the
Can I-
definitions, is it
Yeah,
somewhere?
there it is. It is in 5352, number 4. When the housing provider charges a move-in fee and/or an administrative fee, the housing provider shall provide the tenant with an itemized list of the housing provider's reasonable estimate of the costs that comprise the move-in fee and/or administrative fees, and shall not charge the tenant moving into the premises for costs associated with routine maintenance and the upkeep of the premises. So I think that's important that you hear the whole.
Right. Yep. So I ask again, is there a second? Whoops, we have a second. Okay, Councilmember Burns. I mean,
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
Councilmember
I'm
Reed.
sitting in a seat. All right, so with that, I just because I haven't heard where everyone is on this, I just want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what we're saying. We'd leave in the requirement that these fees be associated with only move-in cost and not the cleaning of the unit when a previous tenant moves out, and not other costs that aren't related to the actual move-in. But then we're going to say that we don't, so we're going to leave all of that stuff in, but then we're going to take out the part where the person actually proves that it is related to the cost. And so I would just encourage folks to stick with what is here in the ordinance to make sure that the only way to enforce this consumer protection is to make sure that consumers know what the costs are associated with their move-in, so they can reasonably assess whether or not those charges are fair. And so the disclosure is critically important to this, and I encourage folks to vote this down.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
go briefly.
Oh, thank you. I didn't hear you. Thank you. So the problem with that assumption is that, when I give you the apartment is impeccable. When you leave the apartment, you can leave it all trashed down. There is no security deposit for the most part. Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
So I think we're ready to have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Harakaris?
No.
Councilmember Reed?
No.
Committee Member Rodriguez?
Yes.
Committee Member Zalomi?
Yes.
Committee Member Berlin?
No.
Committee Member Thurston?
No.
Chair Ravel?
No. Okay.
Your microphone.
You know, I don't have other items, but I have spots where I think things need to be changed that, like, you know, I have, let's see. I gotta go back to the beginning. Where's my first one? Where I think they're just inconsistencies. So like on page 13 at the bottom, it says, and giving, I said this chapter, housing written notes delivered 20 days of a tenant. Any security or prepaid rent not so applied, and the interest on such security. Okay, well, we still have to do that if we're not charging interest anymore, but we have in the past. Oh, see, well, it's.
I think
bottom
that
of
was
page
missed, the security
13,
deposit.
Now it's B instead of C. But
Yep.
the next to last sentence, upon termination, prior to security or prepayment rent, shall we apply the pay event? But you have 21 days to, give back the security deposit and prepaid rent, but it does say, and any interest on such security deposit.
Yeah, okay.
I think that was just a missed thing. I think that should just be pulled.
Point of order, I don't think it matters if we're no longer charging interest. I mean, there are leases that, somebody could have had a 5-year lease, this takes
Right.
effect, and so they are under they have interest that is accrued, and so this really, I don't think has an impact on, because it says if any, it doesn't require that there's interest, it just says if there was interest, you must give it back.
Well, since using that example, okay, if we were supposed to give people interest in the back and we did, I mean, it's so minimal, it's been so minimal, but we should have given it at the end of the year anyway. Wasn't it supposed to be annual? But anyway, I just wonder if we still need that sentence in there since we're not going to be charging interest.
Well, yeah. I mean, if there are changes, if there are revisions that are needed that are kind of not quite grammatical errors, but, Scrivener errors, whatever we call those things. I mean, staff can make those without our having to
Okay.
to vote on them.
Because I'll send
Okay.
you an email then. Because there were several places where, now I can't
No, so
remember
if
where
there are things like that, send them
Yeah.
to staff, and if staff
Yeah.
thinks they need to, they can get changed before that goes to city council. Ugo?
Thank you. Point number 6, disclosure of utility costs for closure activity and code violations. I'm in agreement with the code violations for closure activity. I've seen this during the big recession in 2006 to 2014, where tenants took advantage of knowing that the property was on foreclosure and stopped paying rent to the landlords. So I have very strong concerns about that. Disclosure of utility cost, I think that the city of Evanston then is going to have to make a move and make a requirement to the utility companies to respond to request of that information in a promptly manner so we can give that to the tenants. The tenants open their own accounts for electricity and for gas when they provide their own heat. So it is very burdensome, and many times the utility companies don't give the information to the landlords because they're not the account holders for that property, especially when there is a change of ownership. It gets even more cumbersome. So I believe that if the city is willing to talking to the utility companies and making mandatory for them to reply to landlords, the MLS, as it currently does for the Midwest real estate data, they provide a link when we put in a listing on that MLS to request the information. In Chicago, that requirement only pertains to the heating source if the tenant pays for heat,
Yeah.
not necessarily all utilities. Furthermore, most buildings in the city of Evanston have water under 1 meter. They're all metered on a single entry point to the building. So when you say utilities, we have to maybe be a little bit more clear as to, is it the heating source if the tenant pays for the heat, and how is the landlord going to manage that with the utility companies? That is not a motion, that is a question for staff in part.
Well, I think that we have to just look at what's in the draft ordinance, which is on page 15. It is section 5-3-5-2, again, disclosure, but it's item 3, whether the housing provider or tenant bears the responsibility for payment of the cost of heat for the dwelling unit. I think it should be whenever or something, but that's hard. In rental agreements in which the tenant pays the cost of heat for a dwelling unit and is directly responsible to the utility company, the utility service shall be individually metered to the dwelling unit, and the housing provider shall disclose to the tenant in the rental agreement the annual cost of service from the utility providing the primary service during the previous 12 months, if known. B, in rental agreements in which the tenant pays the cost of heat for a dwelling unit to the housing provider shall disclose to the tenant in the rental agreement the annual cost of service from the utility providing the primary service during the previous 12 months. If the housing provider did not own the dwelling unit during the previous 12 months or did not pay the utility costs to the utility provider on behalf of the tenant during the previous 12 months, the housing provider may satisfy this requirement by providing cost of service for a similar dwelling unit, if known, or disclose to the tenant that the utility costs are unknown to the housing provider. So I think that's pretty well covered. It's only if it's information they have.
You know, and I'm not in disagreement with that disclosure. I think that that is important for somebody's budget to come in and know that if they're responsible for heat, which is the main concern, either electric or gas or water or whatever the heating source is. But what I'm asking is for the city to be the responsible to approach the utilities companies, ComEd and NICOR, in the case of Evanston, and make the requirement from them to give that report to landlords, because it's very cumbersome, Sarah. It's very difficult to get it. I'm not opposing the disclosure because I think it's critical, but I think that there should be a system applied to that so the landlords can go to that system and get that information rapidly and efficiently.
I understand that potential issue, but that's why it says if known. There is no absolute requirement. If they don't know it, then they just don't do it.
Most landlords don't know that information, and I think it's critical. What I'm saying is the tenant is entitled to know that information, but if we allow if known, I don't know what my tenant pays for electricity.
So I think that's an action outside of amending the RLTO, so we can certainly pursue that. But Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. One, I fully support this this particular item. My only slight concern, if I did have a concern, is that, that one tenant could really love to crank up the heat and have a higher heating cost, and but also again, this ordinance provides clear the ability of a housing provider to look at a similar unit and estimate cost, and particularly if someone has been in the business for a while, would be able to look at that across similar units. I will say that, I think that this was another example of why I think we need to move on. I don't think that we're having necessarily a good faith debate here. because there,
Well, how about, why don't you make a motion that we approve the package?
it's been moved, and so it's
Oops,
either
we have- okay, yeah.
calling the question or just no one else has any other questions. So the motion, I would move to call the question, but,
Right.
you know, I just think that we've
Right.
demonstrated that folks maybe aren't reading the packet clearly enough. They have concerns about things, but clearly aren't reading the language, because if you read the language, your answers would be provided.
Yes, thank you. I do have a very strong opinion on number 11, which is to remove the tenant's responsibility to pay attorney's fees in eviction proceedings if the landlord prevails in that eviction proceeding. So it's very costly to a landlord to hire an attorney, and it's really last resort for most landlords. I'm not saying for everybody, but for most landlords. And the reality is that very seldom a landlord gets to get those attorney fees, but it is leverage that we have for a tenant that is going through eviction. Believe me, eviction is the ultimate resort for most landlords. I'm sure there is an exception there that gets pleasure by evicting people, but it's gotta be a freak. So I think that this is, how do you have more rights than I do?
Can I ask staff, do Cook County or Chicago, do they have a provision like this?
Yes, Cook County does.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yes, Councilmember Reed.
Thank you.
It's so confusing because it says Burns.
Yeah, my apologies for sitting here. I should have just sat in my seat, but I wanted to be in the thick of things between.
You are.
So can staff pull up the, thank you, pull up the language for this particular section? And I'm still having a hard time seeing it, but if staff can.
Just give us the page and we will
Yeah.
find it.
Can staff also provide the page for folks who?
It's page 7.
Page, okay.
Page 7 of the
Thank you.
draft.
Thank you.
Is it the first point?
Oh, I'm sorry, not the,
Oh, something else.
no, where the language actually resides, not the bulleted list. Is that page 7? Yes, the attorney's fees item.
No, it isn't.
Number 7 on page 7. Thank you.
Verse 7 on page 7. Where are we?
Do you want, it reads, agrees that in the event of a lawsuit arising out of the tenancy, the tenant will pay the landlord, pay the housing provider's attorney's fees except as provided by for court rules, statute, or ordinance. This paragraph shall, well, this is a part that is in the Cook County one. This
Yeah, so
shall also apply to a mobile home owner who as a tenant rents. Is that the part you're referring to?
yes, yes. Well, that's what Mr. Rodriguez was referring to, correct?
Yeah, you can still call me Ugo.
Okay. So does this also prohibit, if, let's say the tenant is successful in if a tenant is to bring a housing case against a housing provider and they win, do we have any requirements that housing providers cover the attorney's fees for tenants?
I'll hazard a guess that we don't.
I can't
I would
find it. It's so convoluted.
subject to court order.
This is impossible to find, sorry. Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Correct. So do we have a requirement anywhere that a housing provider would have to pay attorney's fees for a tenant?
I'm looking, I don't believe so.
Yeah. Thank you. And my point in asking that, my assumption is that there is not a requirement. So it's a question that I believe I know the answer to. And my reason for stating that is this does not give a tenant more rights than the housing provider. All this does is follow what the county has done and requires that you don't put it in the lease that someone has to pay attorney's fees. And so I think even this, I can't see the issue with this remaining in the ordinance. So I'd encourage folks to.
And it should be clear that neither party has a right to request attorney fees from the other party, prevailing or not prevailing. Neither side. If that is the case, I'll be fine with that. But that's not what this says.
Well, this is talking about what shall not be
Can't be
in
put
a
in the lease.
rental agreement.
Right.
It says remove the tenant's responsibility to pay attorney's fees in eviction proceedings.
Right. So the lease agreement cannot require that, cannot require the tenant to pay.
Right, and then it should be
Well,
clear
I
that the
doubt-
tenant cannot require the landlord
But
to
I
pay.
doubt that the lease agreement would
put that in
wanna
there.
include that.
Right.
No landlord's going to put in. I doubt a landlord would put into their lease that I'm going to pay your fees. If
No. What I'm saying is the opposite. I'm saying that
Right, but this is
it
just-
should be
only
clear
talking
that
about-
neither party could
We're
charge
we're
attorney's
only
fees
talking
to
about
the.
what can't be in the lease agreement. We're not talking about in general.
No, this is what it cannot be.
Cannot be in
I
the lease
think
agreement.
I think the confusion is folks are looking at the bullet points rather than looking at the ordinance. And the bullet points, thank you staff for the summary, it's very helpful. But the ordinance provides the fully fleshed out and
Sure.
language.
Oh, these are my.
Cheryl Lawrence can help clarify this from what Chicago says.
Oh, yes. In the Chicago RLTO, landlords pay attorney fees across the board.
We don't have that in our ordinance.
I mean, they don't have to pay, they have to pay their attorney fees to evict somebody. You know, if a tenant hires an attorney and the tenant would have to pay for an attorney, which is why you have legal services to represent tenants. But if you want to evict a tenant, you're responsible for hiring attorney and paying for the attorney.
Totally fine, but the way it's written is saying that, hold on one second.
Again, the bullet point is not going to get you.
No,
there,
I
Cheryl.
know, but I can't find the point here on my screen. I had page 7 and it's not there. Another 7. I was looking at the other 7.
7, right there, 7.
Exactly.
And the key thing to look at, if you scroll up to the top of the page, it says prohibited provisions in rental agreements, and then you go to 7, this is a prohibited.
Regardless, right, it's just.
So, Councilmember Reed, you have any?
Yeah, I would actually like to make a motion in, I'm sorry, did you have a motion on the floor? I don't believe so. So I would like to actually move to add a section or to actually affirmatively require that the housing provider cover all of the cost of evicting a tenant. And so this just does not allow it to be in a lease, but it allows for the court order to do so. But if we made an affirmative ordinance strictly prohibiting a tenant from being on the line for attorney's fees, similar to the Chicago ordinance, creating some parity in the region, I think that would be a wonderful thing. And so I will move to mirror the Chicago language in our ordinance.
Is there a second? I think not. So I think we are ready to vote on the main motion, which is to approve the much-discussed 13 items that make up the amended RLTO and send it with our recommendation for approval to City Council. So
I would actually like to move to table this item. I mentioned it earlier that was my intention. I do think that we've discussed it, we're ready to move, but I do think we should, come back with the full RLTO,
Okay,
including just,
so make a motion, please,
I make that motion.
to table it to when,
Second.
to a certain.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. The certain date would be, I guess our next meeting is when we're going to have a vote on the draft RLTO, on the draft Just Cause? Is that the
Not
intention?
necessarily.
No,
No,
we
haven't gotten
there
that
was
far.
another full item on the agenda for our next meeting.
I think you mentioned special meetings for that, Chair Ravel.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if we need to talk about the
I withdraw
Just
my
Cause
motion.
ordinance, it needs to be a special.
I make the motion.
So what, Councilmember Harakar has the light on.
I just had a question for staff. We could, if we pass the ordinance to move to council, can we delay the timing of when council here? Because I think we had a really robust discussion tonight. I think it'd be a good idea to, now that we're at consensus, I hope, to move forward and get some business done.
It
We
could
can
be
do that,
delayed
yeah.
at council.
Okay.
The mayor could do that, or council could delay it ourselves. So I withdraw the motion, as I stated already.
Yeah, because members of council can. vote
I
to
made the
table it
motion.
there.
I did make the motion.
I don't think there's a second.
We haven't asked for, is there a second?
Okay, what is the motion?
To table this to a date certain. We don't have the date yet, but I don't think. This item, the RLTO.
No, the
The whole
motion is to
13.
table
No,
the
this is the
13.
whole- Yeah. The whole RLTO.
Okay, so we have a motion to table the main motion, which is to approve all 13 things and send them to city council.
Was there a second?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I haven't.
I think the answer is no.
No. Well, we'd have to table it to a special meeting because the regular meeting agendas are full. I'm not hearing a second.
Yes. Okay.
So I think we are ready now. Ugo, do you have to say something?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's have a roll call, please, on this, the amended RLTO.
Councilmember Harakars.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Committee Member Rodriguez. Committee Member Zolimi. Committee Member Berlin.
Yes.
Committee Member Thurston.
Yes.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, Ugo. Oh, okay.
I'm
Councilmember Reed.
I'm going to move our next item, which is discussion of.
Everything else.
Yeah, I'm going to move item B.
Okay. And I think we wanted maybe to hear from staff.
Yes, actually, we want, Kathy Lone will take you through
Yes,
the.
oh, right, okay.
Actually, I suggest we flip-flop. Well, no, I don't know. Do you want to go through those three things first? Which way do you want to do it?
Well, I think we need some direction on the just cause, so.
Yes,
let's-
that's what I was thinking.
Right, yeah.
Kathy Lone would do. I just wanted to make sure.
Lauren?
I just I want to understand what's happening now. So we are going to be voting on Just Cause this evening?
We're just discussing what we want to do with it.
Okay.
Do we want to continue to talk about it?
Okay.
What more research might we want?
Okay.
Sort of how to proceed.
Okay.
No, we are not voting on it tonight, no. Okay. Yes.
Hello again, Chair Ravel and members of the committee. It's Catherine Penrose Lone, Assistant City Attorney. I wanted to, as you're aware, as part of the packet, there's a memo that I drafted that has caused immense confusion. I want to clarify that, as I stated in the beginning of the memo, that memo is not and was never intended to be anyone's legal opinion. If I had drafted a memo presenting my legal opinions, ethically, it would not be in a packet that would be distributed to the public. There's a reason why that type of information is not discoverable under FOIA. It's because I have ethical obligations to keep my opinions between myself and my client. which in this case is the city. So instead, what we did was we did what lawyers do. We were given a policy, and we raised issues red flags or issues that came up. There's no determination. No one is trying to convince this committee to do anything. No one is trying to scrap anything. We raise issues so that you know what all the potential risks are before you go ahead and start discussing or voting on anything. So much to the potential disappointment of some members of the public, it was not a legal determination that the just cause ordinance should not be considered. When you are considering this ordinance, though, there were some things that we just want to make sure you keep in mind. The number one, the most important being that there is this statute in Illinois that prohibits municipalities from regulating or controlling rent. We unfortunately don't have a ton of guidance from courts in our state as to what exactly that means. That's one of the, in addition to the ethical issues, that's another reason why it was not a legal opinion, because there isn't much to go on there. If we had drafted legal opinions, it would be much longer than 3 pages. It would be very, very long, and it's not. All we wanted to point out was that there isn't anything that addresses that, so there is some risk. And if it did become an issue in the future, the only way we'd get an answer is via a court case, via litigation. We don't get to get advisory opinions from Illinois courts saying, can you please tell me what this means? It would mean litigation, and that needs to be a risk that the committee is aware of. The same thing I raised very briefly, the issues of takings and freedoms to takings clause and the freedoms to contract. It's a very brief mention, just so the committee is aware that at a certain point, as the level of regulation continues, if it gets more regulated, more and more regulated, it's a concern. As I pointed out in the memo, these types of cases are extremely fact-specific. What exactly is the committee doing to regulate? And we want the committee to be aware that there is a limit, a point at which we want to start being concerned that we're, dipping a toe into the takings or freedom to contract issues. And with that, I'll open any questions.
Okay.
The maker of the motion has the first crack at it.
Okay.
So, thank you, Chair. First one, Ms. Sloan, I appreciate your opening statement there. That's really clarifying. What I would just ask staff in the future, that if we're going to give, loose, and sorry for the terminology there, loose, but non-legal opinions, that it not come from one of our city attorneys. That, if there's concerns about legality that are raised and we're not giving it a definitive legal opinion, it should come from Director Flax or from staff. That way there isn't the confusion in the community that makes folks think, if you see from Deputy City Attorney Catherine Lone, and you see these legal opinions that are citing law, it really does give off the notion that these are legal opinions. And I understand there was some clarification within the memo that would have led some folks not to believe that, but not everyone is a lawyer, and not everyone has a good faith effort of reading through all of that. I will also say that, and then I'll say some of it, I'm not quite clear how it's even a, legal opinion or not, but, I'll just quickly go through the 4 items, which is item A, just cause provisions do not address evictions. I don't think anyone here was saying that just cause is about evictions. It's about non-renewals. It's very clear in the language of the ordinance. It's about non-renewals. And so I think that's important for the committee to understand. And it's been raised in public comment quite a bit that, this will not solve the affordability issue. Well, there was never a point where anyone said that just cause would solve the affordability issue. And in fact, I've said from this dais many times that the just cause ordinance is about stability, not affordability. It's about housing stability to make sure that folks know when they move into a rental unit that they have, as long as they keep up their end of the deal, they will have some assurance that they can remain in that unit. I'll skip down to number 4, which is due process and a constitutional issue. I'll just note for the committee that just cause has been enacted in places, in many places across this nation that would have the same constitutional constraints of I think it was the 13th or whatever amendments were referenced within the memo. And in many places, in fact, entire states have just cause, and this issue has not been raised constitutionally. Then to the contract freedom concern, we passed a whole host of we approved a whole host of ordinances tonight, provisions within one large ordinance that would regulate a contract in many ways. We said, we gave requirements on how much notice you have to give for that contract and how much notice the tenant has to give. So we are certainly already making policies that will impact quote unquote contract freedom. And I think this is it falls directly in line with those items. And again, a number of municipalities and including entire states have enacted very similar policy. Now to the what I think is and as Ms. Lone also said, I think the one that holds the most weight, which is the concern around the state statute and rent control, and particularly around the relocation assistance. The language in the state statute says, I can't find it in front of me, but it says that a municipality may not regulate or control. That's the key language: regulate or control, pass a policy, pass an ordinance that would have the effect of regulating or controlling the rent. And when we look at rent control policies across the nation, rent control policies, you look at New York and other places, are truly rent control policies. This does not require, say that a housing provider can't raise their rent over a certain amount. It doesn't control the amount of rent that anyone would charge. All it says is that if a tenant chooses not to renew their lease because you made an increase of 15% or more over 1 year, and I'll note that Mr. Passett, who is on the Housing Committee, who's left now, I'm pointing at his empty seat, and Mr. Rodriguez, who was Ugo, who was also on the task force, 2 housing providers, both agreed that someone raising rent over 15% in 1 year, year over year, was excessive. That's what both housing providers on that committee agreed, and that's why we settled on the 15% number. And I think most of us would agree that, again, if a 15% increase for someone who has a $2,000 rent would be $150 in 1 year, which is, certainly people raise rent more than that in 1 year, but that is a fairly substantive increase when you look at the cost over the course of the year. And so I think there is certainly, as was noted within the memo, this is certainly, there's gray area here. It's not very clear whether or not the relocation assistance the requirement for relocation assistance if you raise the rent over 15% would violate this particular statute. And so what I would encourage us to do is, I think there are tweaks that we can make. Maybe we, for this particular issue, lower the relocation assistance. Maybe we raise the threshold from 15% to 20, 25%. And I think that making those kinds of tweaks allow us to really slip further from what may be on the gradient, starting to get into, an area that would cause major concern for courts, and slide a bit further into the green by making sure that we potentially raise it to, I would say 20% would be the threshold increase year over year, or 25%, and then reduce the relocation assistance to from 2 or 3 months to maybe 1 month, if the particular reason for the non-renewal is the rent increase. And so, again, I want to be clear that we need to move forward. This committee should, continue to advise council on how to move forward with this and make sure that we put forward a robust ordinance. And I want to ask, as separate of my time here, somewhat, a point of order to get some clarification on 2 things for both this body and for council. And I want to note that at one of our most recent council meetings, the Parks and Rec Board voted down a proposal to allow for seating rental and umbrella rentals at the lakefront. The Parks and Rec Board voted that down. It still moved forward to council, and our corporation council's determination was that committees are advisory, and items that are, whether the committee votes yay or nay, similar to our land use commission, that items still should move forward to council. Are you familiar with that determination, Ms. Sloan?
Yes.
Yes. And do you agree with that determination?
Yes. That's
So-
the way that none of the committees have final say on.
Thank you. Yeah. So my point being is, regardless of what this committee does, this is moving forward to council, and council will have the opportunity to vote on this. So I think, I think we need to take this seriously, move something forward to council, that council can really seriously consider. My second point is, or second question, and I think this is going to have legal have to go back and do some research, but I'm not even sure. I appreciate this committee. I appreciate the diversity of voices. Maybe not the diversity, but particularly that we have a number of housing providers and folks from diverse backgrounds on this committee. But I'm not sure if the Just Cause ordinance truly should have even come to the HCDC committee, because I would really encourage folks to read the ordinance that authorizes the Housing and Community Development Committee. And if you read the section that says what the Housing and Community Development Committee is supposed to do, nothing in it would lead, I think, anyone reasonable to believe that this is a part of the core mission of the Housing and Community Development Committee. And so I do think, we've started the work here. I think, and this is an advisory board. I appreciate the membership here to advise us, but I don't know if this is the proper venue in the first place. I think Human Services is actually the proper venue for Just Cause, and probably should have gone there in the first place. And so, nonetheless, I think we should continue to get input from this committee. But if this committee continues to drag its feet on this, I think we should follow our ordinances, follow the law, and the Human Services Committee should deal with this if this committee doesn't move with proper timing to address this. Again, this has been about a year that we have been going on a year that we've been discussing this item in this committee, and longer than that since the referral was made. So thank you.
Okay, Lauren.
As a volunteer who's just a citizen, that's super offensive. I mean, what this is basically being told to us is it doesn't matter what we think, it'll go to committee anyways. So I don't really know what we're doing here 3 hours in, if the point is that our opinions won't actually, be necessary to making this decision. I think that's a conversation for a different moment. I find that incredibly demoralizing and really frustrating, and food for thought. In terms of what I believe this conversation was actually about, which was, do we have any questions? Assuming my opinion matters at this point, I have not seen, my understanding is that in places that have implemented Just Cause, the ordinances are relatively recent, say within the last couple of years. It's unclear to me how well the long-term, both the short and the long-term implications are understood. I agree with the point that this is about housing stability and not affordability. So the question then becomes, what's the impact on housing stability? My understanding from the part of the housing markets that I work in, which is primarily on the backside around financing, multifamily development and single-family development and consumer mortgages, it's unclear to me that the jury is really, it seems the jury's still out on how much renter stability is impacted. The other question I have that I would love some more information on is, to the extent it's possible, given the short time frame for most of these policies, what's been the impact on rents? As I've said many times, my biggest concern is that we are playing a little bit of not kick the can, because the crisis is very urgent now, but that we are attempting in trying to solve one problem to create another massive problem down the road, which is that whether we like the economics of the housing markets or not, the reality is that increasing risks to property owners and making it more difficult to do an eviction is increasing risk, will respond in an increase in pricing to account for that risk, whether that is straight rent increases, which I would be really curious to see if there's documentation on that, or whether or that's in the form of raising the bar on who you will allow to rent a unit. I'm very concerned that this will make access to affordable housing more difficult in the long term. And I actually agree with something that was said earlier, and I think there's a lot of research to back this up. Well, that's a different point. So I will leave that alone. But I think I'm ready to wind down this meeting. I really don't appreciate what I've heard the last few minutes, and it doesn't seem to me like a good use of my time at this moment. If the point is that this is going forward no matter what, then all right, do your thing with the committee's council members.
Point of order, or point of information.
I don't need to follow your point of orders. This is very insulting.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
completely out of order.
Right,
What
yeah.
you just said. I spent
Dude,
five.
hold on. No. You're making
I don't.
accusations.
No.
I didn't say it. The law department made that determination.
Well,
I
you
personally
made
don't
it.
agree with it,
You
but the
made
law
it.
department made the
I
determination.
spent 5
Order,
years in
order.
this committee,
Ugo's had his
and now
line
you
up for a
tell
long
me
time.
our opinion doesn't count at all?
No, your opinion does count. Put something forward to council that we can vote on. And that's not what I said. It's what the law department said. I
I'd
didn't
like to
make that
clarify that
determination.
when I said a committee did not have the final say, I don't think that's particularly controversial. Your opinions and your input are taken in deeply into a council. So I
That's
certainly
not what-
didn't mean to imply that no one cared about your opinion. It's just that, as you know, you're not the final body that will make this
No,
decision.
I have no illusions who the final body is. What I heard from Mr. Reed is that it doesn't really matter what we say this is going forward to committee anyways. That's what I find offensive. Of course, we don't have the authority to make the rules, and frankly, I don't have the thick enough skin to make the rules. That's fine. I'm just trying to help, and to have someone on the committee tell me that it doesn't really matter what this committee does because it'll go forward anyways, that's fine. That's fine. But then I don't need to be here at 10 o'clock at night exhausted, trying my best.
Yeah.
I think I'm actually done. I know the meeting's not over. I'm really not trying to be rude. I'm just exhausted, and I'm really trying hard. And to be told that it just doesn't really matter because it's going forward anyways,
We were
I just want to go
very
home.
rooted
I
out,
just want to go
Lauren.
home and get a cup of tea and go to bed tonight.
Yeah. What I would like to suggest is that, so first of all, I don't believe this committee ever, as a whole, ever received the work of the task force that worked on just cause.
The ordinance, what the work was, the ordinance that's before us. We spent months and meeting
Well,
weekly.
anyway, so I think probably a number of us, I certainly do have questions about, some additional information I'd like about how this kind of ordinance has worked in other communities, especially communities that don't have rent control. And so what I would like to suggest is that the committee members forward to staff the questions that they would like more information on. And then we're going to have to set a special meeting date to talk about this issue because there's clearly not time on a regular meeting night. So I would ask staff to help us figure out a date when we could have that kind of a meeting. And then I'm quite happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just one point of order, because, I mean, there wasn't a motion, so point of order and point of clarity for folks who are on this committee. I am simply stating what has been what recently is something I just learned of, the opinion of the law department. And what I'm encouraging this committee to do is, within good faith, try to make amendments here, because council does care about what our committees say. Our council.
Not what you just said.
Hold on. Well, let me speak. That's not what I did not say. Council doesn't care. No, I didn't. So stop, the audience. All right. Well,
I thank everyone for their time.
Yeah.
I'm leaving, and I'll see everyone soon.
Right, okay, so.
One last point of order. I just want to have the legal department and staff review the membership of the committee, and to make sure that membership is compliant with with the ordinance. And committee members must consist of the following: 4 council members, 2 members who reside or work in predominantly low, moderate income Evanston neighborhoods. I'm not sure who those 2 members, 2 at-large members, and then 1 member who has the lived experience of living in public housing. I don't know who that member is, and so I would seek clarification from this body on that, as well as my first question, which is just cause even appropriate for this based on the ordinance and our this committee's jurisdiction? Thank you.
Okay, I'm declaring us adjourned. Unless, do you have any last
Well,
remarks?
I wanted to clarify a couple of quick points in response to some of the things that Councilmember Reed had said. It's very quick. Yes, just cause ordinances have occurred in other jurisdictions. They're often very different. I've done a lot of digging into Seattle's, for instance. They are very different. Not saying that it's worse or better. It's different and not litigated. So we can say, yeah, there hasn't been any constitutional ruling on them. Well, okay, but that's not the whole question. And as far as when I brought up the freedom to contract, as I mentioned there, yes, we regulate terms of contracts all the time. But the issue is whether to contract, period. And that's all I raised in that situation. And again, you were right to point out that the language that I would love, but without having to spend legal fees, to get a determination on is what effect it has, the effect of regulating or controlling rent. And does 15%, does saying you have to pay something if you raise rent more than X amount of dollars, does that have the effect of? I'm not a court.
And just for clarity on that, the point about the contract freedom. So with that, we're not saying that you have to rent to Joe Schmo. You choose who you rent to. And we're saying that once you choose to rent to this person, you can't just not renew the lease for no reason. And so if we were to, just like we did with the ordinance where we said that you can't put in a lease that someone, that the resident has to, the tenant has to pay attorney's fees, there are other provisions that we have in the RLTO that require certain things within the lease. And so would you feel more comfortable if we had a requirement that said, once you have voluntarily entered into a lease contract with someone, you must renew that lease with, unless there's just cause? I mean, if it was a requirement to be in the lease as opposed to another requirement.
My only statement with that is that a lease renewal is a new agreement. Thank you.
Great, okay, thank you.
The chair declared us adjourned.
I declared us adjourned.